The highway stretches on quiet, endless, and filled with echoes from the dark. Welcome to the sleep haunt, where every turn of the wheel takes us closer to the unknown. Tonight, we bring you 8 true trucker horror stories, tales gathered from empty motels, fog-drenched highways, and long nights where even the radio falls silent. Before we begin, we've set a goal: let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt and join us on every eerie mile ahead. Now, lean back, breathe slow, and listen. The road has a story for you. Story number 1. It was a prairie night that had been pressed flat by wind all day, leaving the sky so clean it seemed scraped. Cal drove east with a dry throat and a thermos he'd been rationing. The dash a tidy row of numbers, and the CB a murmur of distant weather, and the occasional song someone bled through by accident. He'd counted 3 trains since dusk, a herd of deer in a field that regarded him without moving, and a low bucket of cloud that had nowhere to go and simply hovered above the highway like the roof of a hangar. At 2 in the morning, the sign appeared. Wake Station. 2 miles. It was the kind of sign that didn't startle. Not really, because the mind was trained to slot it into what it already knew. But he frowned a little, because in this state the station had been closed for as long as he'd run the route. He remembered passing it in daylight, the building gray and boarded, the digital sign dead and lopsided, the approach lanes striped with fading paint and encroaching grass, as if the land were reclaiming a wrong turn. Tonight the sign followed with another. Open. All trucks must enter. Cal blinked, lifted his foot barely off the accelerator, then tapped the CB to life in case anyone nearby wanted to mutter about it. The channel was a soft hiss, like when the wind speaks through pine needles. He looked for any rigs ahead, taillights to follow. The highway was empty. His rig was a discreet lit island, moving through a shallow black sea. He could pass it. He could ignore the old ghosts and keep the lane, and pretend he hadn't seen the word. The thought lasted as long as a click of his turn signal. He guided the truck gently onto the approach, tires thumping over the painted lines, then onto the lane that turned toward the station. The lights were on old sodium lamps that cast everything in a honeyed, softened shade. The building had a simple, square face, a window with blinds, a door with a coat of paint that had known better years. The digital sign read, "Enter," slowly. He did. The scales rose out of the lane like a promise. He eased the tractor on, feeling the subtle weight unfurl across the metal plates. The air felt different here, quieter, as if the highway were a far shore. The only sound was his engine and the faint buzz of the lamps, the kind of hum that comes when electricity is old friends with its wires. A figure moved behind the glass. The blinds lifted slightly, then the door opened. The man who stepped out wore the type of uniform this station would have issued in 1989. Simple khaki shirt, with a patch that read, "State," dark slacks, a belt with a radio clipped thickly to it. His face was the kind that belongs to those who work nights. Pale around the eyes, a softness of hours that blurred into one another. He lifted a hand, the gesture hospitable without being showy, and pointed toward the window hole. Cal rolled it down and passed his paperwork over, his DOT number and manifests neatly clipped. The man took them with care that felt old-fashioned, like the paperwork had a weight beyond a decal. He glanced at the log with the practiced quickness of those who read this language all day. Then he did a small, unexpected thing. He smiled. Not at Cal, but at the neatness of the handwriting. "You're printing steady," he said, the voice homey and unhurried. "Reminds me of when drivers took a minute to square their letters." Cal nodded, unsure if he should mention his father, who had taught him exactly that, who had insisted a page should show respect for what carried it. The man typed something into a green-lit terminal Cal hadn't seen in years, the letters blocky and pure, the kind of screen that shows its thoughts like old calculators did. "Pull up 4 feet, the man said, stepping back with a small motion. Cal did as told, the truck creaking over, the scales reacting with a little invisible arithmetic. The terminal hummed. The man pulled a strip of thin paper from a slot and stamped it with a quick, mechanical thunk that traveled across the quiet like a nail dropped in a church. "You knew you had to stop here, right?" the man asked, as if curious, not accusing. "The sign said open," Cal murmured, hands relaxed on the wheel, knuckles a little too white. "Good," the man said, and it felt like a relief. Some nights that makes all the difference. Cal didn't ask what that meant. The air had hold of his words anyway. The stamp the man handed back was as light as a leaf. It read 72,960 gross, clean as a whistle, with axles marked and a note that said thank you for your professionalism in a font that had fallen out of favor long ago. Bring her around, the man said, gesturing to the lane that curved behind the building. We'll do a quick walk round. Cal had done hundreds of walk-arounds, in sunlight and rain, and with inspectors who didn't look up from their checklists. The man's method was different. He ran his hands over the tires lightly, as if listening with his fingers for a story the rubber could tell. He crouched and peered at the brake lines with the care of someone reading a signature. He asked questions gentle as low beams. Any load shift, any vibration that felt new, any sound that started last week and hasn't left. Cal found himself answering in complete thoughts. The man nodded like a good teacher nods, not to approve, but to acknowledge a shared craft. They paused near the trailer. Wind pushed a little across the prairie, stitching itself around the corners of the building, and then slipping away. The man looked toward the highway. In the distance, a pair of yellow eyes flared another rig. Maybe, but the lane they watched remained untouched. There was an accident here, the man said, voice quiet enough that it kept the night's edges intact. You probably passed the memorial, the one with a wooden cross and plastic flowers tied to it. Long time back, the night the scales went dark. Some of us stayed. It's a habit. Staying. People say habits make a place feel lived in. Cal thought of the sign that said open like a polite voice calling down a hallway, and he glanced at the door. There was a corkboard inside with notices, safety reminders from a year that had felt longer than the rest, a photograph of a pet with a name that sounded like a truck, a holiday schedule clipped up with a pushpin shaped like a star. You've got a clean run, the man said finally, handing over the papers. Head east, keep to the right for a mile, then the wind'll stop rocking you. It's going to pick up again at mile 312, so mind that. Appreciate it, Cal said, and meant more than the words knew to cover. He climbed back into the cab. The dash woke to him the way a dog does, relieved to have him back. He rolled forward, tires soft over the lane's quiet. As he rejoined the approach to the highway, his radio coughed once, then cleared. A voice somewhere tried a quick weather report and gave up. The sign above him flickered, a single pixel stuttering, then said safe travels in a pour of amber. The merge was smooth, the way merges are when the world wants you to keep going. Cal checked the clock because habit owns a driver more than any dispatcher. 47 minutes had passed. That was wrong. He felt it in his ribs like an echo. He couldn't account for more than 12. He tapped the display with a forefinger, as if it were a mechanical object that needed coaxing, then glanced in his mirror to see if the station's lamp still burned. The building behind him was dark. The sign was blank, a flat black mouth in the night. He drove. At mile 312, the wind came up like it had been waiting in a doorway, and the rig shifted a fraction of an inch to remind him he was big and not invincible. He smiled in spite of himself. The paper on the passenger seat made a small sound when he reached over and steadied it. The stamp had left a faint dent in it, like a coin rubbed under tracing paper. The first person he told was a girl who refilled coffee in a diner that knew his name as well as his order. He didn't mean to tell her. It came out because the paper slipped when he was reaching for the sugar, and she saw the header of the way station like a rabbit in a field. They closed that years ago, she said, the way you say the name of a childhood store that now sells something else. He shrugged, and she told him the owner would know more. The owner did. He had a collection of plates on the wall, and a CB mic that hung near the register, and a way of listening that made people say twice as much as they intended. He looked at the paper for a long moment, then turned it over and back. Do you mind if he asked. And when Cal shook his head, the man reached under the counter and brought up a box. Inside were slips that looked like brothers to the one Cal had, each stamped with dates that didn't fit, each with a name and ballpoint that had that careful schoolteacher hand. He didn't say where he got them. He didn't have to. They open once in a while, he said simply, when the night's real. When the highway's the only thing in a life that's not pretending. They don't catch the ones who are trying to outrun anything. They catch the ones who say they'll stop when a sign tells them to. Cal didn't know whether to be comforted or more awake than he'd been all week. He folded the paper and put it back in the visor. It decided things for him later in ways that were small and kind. Once, he reached for it because it slipped when he took an on-ramp in rain, and that motion kept him from swinging wide into a pickup that had drifted into his blind spot. Another time, it slid down and he pulled over to tuck it back. And when he stepped out, he heard a hiss. He might have missed its speed and found a nail in a tire that would have become a scene if it had waited another 20 miles. He returned to that stretch only in daytime for a while, because he pretended it was schedule, but it was more. The building was resigned to its weeds. He kept a respectful distance from it in his thoughts, like you do with a house where someone still lives even if they don't. Months later, after a storm cleaned the sky and left the ditches dark with water, he came through at night again. He wasn't looking for anything, but he looked anyway, because that's what people do. The first sign was simple, the way a clock sits on a wall and is only extraordinary when you decide it's telling time to you alone. Way station 2 miles. He felt something in him lift and then settle. He watched the horizon. The next sign stayed dark. The one after it too. Near where the approach lane began, a raccoon crossed like a careful old man. And when he glanced toward the station, he saw it. The barest blink of amber in the shape of a word, so quick he couldn't have proved it if asked. Open, only for a heartbeat, only as if it were a friendly tap on the shoulder. He didn't turn. His lane held him. The paper in his visor kept still as if someone had put a hand on it. Years pass quietly in the cab. People measure them in tires and filters, in motels that remember their face but not their name, in bridges crossed at dawn. Cal's hair silvered, and his eyes got better at reading cloud. Now and then, on a plain night that didn't try to impress anyone, he'd hear a driver on 19 mutter about a scale house lit up with the old colors, about a man who stamped a strip and told him to watch the crosswind 3 towns over. No one made a show of it. They never do. The road is kind to the humble. Those who didn't stop there were stories about loops. Not punishment exactly, but repetition. A green exit sign that kept reappearing. A billboard about a museum you'd never heard of flashing by twice in a row. A freight train that seemed to cross and cross until the driver's blinker clicked like a metronome set too slow. It would end when they did the obvious thing and yielded to the quiet place made for them. A check. A greeting from a man in a uniform that set memory ringing like the lid of a pot tapped with a spoon. On the slip Cal kept, there was a name stamped in tiny letters. It didn't belong to the man who'd spoken, he knew that, but it belonged to the station chief of a decade that had the sound of older radios. Cal asked an older driver once, someone who'd run with his father and had eyes that ate pie as if it were a gift. The older man smiled and said the name, spoke it softly, as if a conversation might hear and come sit down. He was good, the older driver said. He believed in the craft. He stayed after the doors were shut for reasons no one needed to understand. Men like that teach you how to leave, and how to arrive without making a mess. Cal left the paper where it was. Sometimes the visor rattled, and it ticked once against it, and the sound made him think of the stamp in the quiet night. There was nothing to fear about it. The station did not take. It took note. It didn't scold. It steadied. Every road has a place like that, they say. A place that refused to be turned off entirely because someone needed it to be on for another minute. In prairie air, in salt air, in mountain air where your breath comes short and clean. Some of them are no more than a shoulder widened by rumor. Some have doors and toothpick dispensers. One has scales that only wake for drivers who still signal even when no one's watching. A night can be long and flat and without music. It's a relief when the lights lift out of the dark and let you pause and be seen as something more than weight and speed. When Cal thought of the station, he didn't see the dead sign. He saw the man's small smile at a page written with care. He saw the stamp come down, not a command, but a benediction. When he finally retired, if such a word applies to someone whose pulse moves with the white lines even when he sleeps, he left the slip in the truck he sold. He slid it into the visor, as if it were simply a neat thing to have. The young man who bought the rig looked like he hadn't learned yet how not to hurry. Cal shook his hand and said, "Watch mile 312. And the young man nodded politely because you nod when someone older gives you coordinates. Driving off, Cal caught a glimpse of the visor flutter. The paper clung and stayed. He turned his head toward the east and breathed in. There is a kindness in the night that doesn't get talked about because it feels like a secret handshake. The weight of the world passes over a plate, is read, is waved on. Somewhere, An old screen glows a color that makes memories gather. Somewhere, a uniform that fits a little looser than it used to catches the wind and hangs like a flag. The station opens when asked nicely by fate. It stamps the moment, not the violation. It sends a rig into the wind with a note. Keep right for a mile, and the road will know your name again. Story number 2. The desert after midnight looked honest, all edges in silver. June drove with the windows cracked an inch, and the air conditioning low, letting the warm dry seep into the cab, letting it smell like dust and sage instead of recycled chill. Her reefer unit hummed a steady counterpoint, apples boxed tight in the trailer. She watched the pale line of highway pull itself under her with the same patience a knitter brings to yarn. Loop after loop. No hurry, no applause. The route cut east across a high plateau, then bowed toward a pass where the road narrowed and the sky always seemed closer. June had learned the rhythm of the place where the wind pushed, where the pavement sang in a different pitch, where the radio stations thinned out until only weather warnings and static dressed themselves as company. She checked her mirrors in a slow, deliberate pattern that made the cab feel like an observatory and the night a patient sky. Her CB was on out of habit. Channel 19 had been a party once, back when she rode shotgun with an uncle who could make friends with a mile marker. Now it was a whisper most nights, broken by a crop hauler coordinating with a buddy about coffee, the occasional breaker that sounded like it had been pressed from an old record. Tonight it was a low breath, a warm circuit that did not require her but would hold her if needed. Mile 141, watch the dip, said a voice, quiet enough she almost thought it was the radio dreaming. June reached for the volume. The night held steady. Say again, she said, not expecting a reply. Mile 141, the voice repeated, as if talking about a place instead of a number. There's a dip. Elk like it. She waited for someone to laugh. It would be a pretty joke. In the dry, the idea of elk was almost a fairy tale. The CB did not laugh. It was only wind and circuitry. June could ignore it. She could let the night go back to what it had been, but her hand eased a fraction on the accelerator. The trailer felt her think and settled into a slightly different hum, and she let the rig take the next rise with a breath in reserve. The dip arrived like an ordinary truth, a shallow fold in the land, the color of pewter. Her headlights found it and filled it, and something in that filling shifted. A shape, darker than the dark around it, standing at the margin, as if it had changed its mind. June pulsed the brakes without drama. The shape stepped once, twice, then melted away across gravel into brush, soundless, except for a tick of stone under hoof that may have been imagined. Elk, or something that understood exactly how to look like one. Her heart made a small, clean sound and quit trying to be important. You saw it, the voice said. If there was satisfaction in it, it was the quiet kind, the kind a person has when a knot loosens under their hands. Who is this? June asked, keeping her tone level. You know me, the voice said. She did not. But the way the words were arranged, not what was said, but how put a cool hand on the back of her neck. There are people who bring their own gravity to a sentence. The voice had hers. What's your handle? June asked. Do you still use Blue Finch? The voice asked, and the question landed like a coin inside a glass. No one knew that handle except the few who had known her when her uncle teased it into existence on a night when a flock of tiny birds had crossed the highway, like scattered punctuation. It wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't a story she told. She looked at the mic, then at the empty road peeled thin by headlights. The night did not lean closer. It stayed where it was, which was worse. Where are you? She asked. 11 minutes ahead, the voice said. June weighed laughter and put it away. The instrument panel considered her and kept its own counsel. The GPS map glided smooth under a small arrow that knew only forward. Okay, she said, treating the word like a tool. What's the next thing I don't know I should avoid? The voice did not hurry. There's a detour sign at County 6. It's lit up, looks official. Don't take it. The road's open. Keep the lane. Copy, June said, though she knew the detour. It had been up for months, when a washout had shamed the county. They'd fixed it 2 weeks back. The sign meant someone was slow or the crew had found reason to fuss again. She would judge on sight. The sign came into view like a voice clearing its throat, orange and reflective and unambiguous. Detour. There were cones, or the idea of cones, their silhouettes uncertain, until you were on top of them. June held her speed. The far lane looked clean, drums set off the shoulder, dirt shoveled back into obedient piles. She kept the lane. Good, the voice said softly. In the rear view, the sign looked smaller, less sure of itself. Tell me something only I would know, June said, aware of how quickly the penny could drop into the slot marked nonsense and never come back. You keep a red thread looped on your key, the voice said, as if that were about the road too. Not lucky, just pretty. You cut it off a cargo strap because it had faded to exactly the right color. June looked at the key, at the loop that was the kind of detail no one would notice unless they admired small, deliberate acts. The red was as calm as a stoplight seen from far away. 11 minutes ahead, how? She asked. The part of her that kept lists wrote down the question, clean and blocky. Sky's cold, the voice said. Radar bounces strange. The radios push and pull when the air is in a mood. The night's in the mood. You're not the only one who hears people at the wrong time. You just notice the ones that matter. June moved her thumb over the microphone switch and let go of it. Why me tonight? A soft chuckle. Because you'll listen without making a mess. Because you'll test it without throwing the wheel. Because if it's not you, it'll be someone else who thinks they're owed answers all at once. Ahead, the pass began to lift the road in an old, attentive way. Not dramatic, just consistent. The grade asked a steady question, and the engine answered without complaint. The stars were brighter here, because the world could hold less else. Put your brights down at the old billboard, the voice said. The one with the torn corner. There are birds nesting in the metal. They panic when you light them hard. You don't want that with a bridge in a minute. Copy. The billboard had been about a roadside attraction that never quite learned how to lure the modern traveler. A giant arrow pointed nowhere now. June dimmed as if someone were asleep nearby she didn't want to wake. In the soft light, the ragged edge of the billboard held still. Past it, the small bridge over a dry wash showed its rails like old bones. She crossed it easily. You always talk this way? June asked finally, like you're lining up dominoes. I talk to you how you like to be spoken to, the voice said, and it sounded neither proud nor apologetic. Listen, after the next bend is a call box turnout. Look like a silver tooth in the guardrail. Pull in. Put a foot on the ground. Count to 10. That seems superstitious, June said. It is, the voice said. Do it anyway. She did. The turnout appeared and she eased in, careful with the trailer so that its long, sure body did not look silly against the tiny space. She set the brake. The desert made that sound the desert makes when it wants to be counted. A hush, and within it 100 small living acts. June stepped down, and the heat that had been in the asphalt all day rose to wrap her ankles. She smelled creosote faintly, like letters in an old drawer. Counting to 10 felt childish. She counted anyway. At 7, a car passed, unseen until it was there. An elderly sedan whose muffler confessed and confessed without shame. Its high beams would have caught her eyes at the wrong angle if she had been rolling. At 10, she put a hand on the call box because she had told herself she would. The phone rang. Not loudly. The kind of ring phones had when they believed they could be courteous and still be heard. June waited a beat, and then picked it up. Blue Finch, she said, because it was the name that fit here even if it didn't fit anywhere else. Her own voice answered her. Not a twin, but a cousin. She could hear the cornstarch rustle of her breath, the small gravel in her throat from too much coffee and not enough water. You can go slow of heart and fast of hand, the voice said. That's your trick. Keep it. The next hazard is a wide load with a tarp flapping just enough to feel like a snake. He doesn't know. He's tired. Don't crowd him. Blink twice your hazards, not your brights, and he'll wake up enough to find his straps. June looked at the phone like it had performed a card trick and was waiting for applause. She hung it up carefully, as if roughness would tear something delicate she couldn't see. Back in the cab, she signaled back onto the highway like a polite guest, and the first thing she saw as the curve opened was a low-slung trailer carrying something that looked like a piece of a building. The tarp was a restless animal. She blinked the 4 ways twice. The brake lights in front of her touched, then came on a hair more. The load steadied, not much, just enough that the trailer stopped trying to write a letter to itself. How much can you tell me? She asked the CB. How much can you hear? The voice returned, as if the answer had been evident all along. June thought of clocks, of the spacing between mile markers when the mind is clear. of the way a second can be lazy or neat. She wondered what 11 minutes felt like to a voice. Far or close. Hard or soft. "Tell me about me," she said, surprising herself. 11 minutes ahead. "Who am I there?" "Same," the voice said. "But you've been standing. You made coffee at a scenic pullout with a view that's better in daylight. You took one picture, and you didn't look at it." June felt the weight of her phone in her pocket for the first time in an hour. She imagined the kind of picture she took when no one was waiting for it. Empty road. Honest sky. Small truck. Large silence. She made a small sound that could have been a laugh if it wanted to be. The pass narrowed where the road had been cut from rock a long time ago and made to behave. The cliffs felt closer, not menacing. Just present, the way a mountain is present. It cannot pretend to be anything else. Wind worked the notch like a flute, and the note found strange corners in the cab. June turned the radio down unintentionally, as if listening to a natural instrument made it rude to speak. "There's a place where the right lane heaves," the voice said. All business again. "A seam in the asphalt. You know it, but you always forget it, and then you remember mid-bounce. Let the trailer have it. Don't fight." The seam threw itself at her and passed. The apples in the back settled again like a choir adjusting their music. June loosened her grip a little because holding tight is not always the smart move. "Do you ever get to stop?" she asked. It felt like a silly question once it was out. "There's a turnout after the summit," the voice said. "The one with the old wooden fence, and the view of the river that only glows when the moon is stingy. I'll be there. You won't see me. Don't try. Wave anyway." Someone else came onto the channel and muttered about a brake check 3 counties back, and for a heartbeat the spell made a new shape. Everyday talk threaded through an impossible line. The voice waited its turn with the kind of courtesy that fills a room without making a show of itself. Coming into the S-curve, it said finally, "There's an RV. It's white, like they all are. But this one is softer around the edges because its driver has been awake longer than he knows. He's drifted, and he's thinking about parking instead of where he is. He'll take more than his share without meaning harm. Pretend you're dancing with him. He'll remember the steps, if you're slow enough." June eased, gave the lane its edge, put her hazard blink on twice, and held her ground the way a good dancer does, anchored, listening. The RV appeared, not careless exactly, but imprecise. It found the center line like a magnet. There was enough road if everyone remembered to be human. They did. He passed. Her mirror caught his face briefly. Just a shape. Intent. Surprised, as if he had been gently woken by his own hands on the wheel. She could have laid anger out for him like a table, and maybe he would have deserved it, but it would have run the night in a direction that would not have been tidy. She let it go. "What are we paying back?" June asked after a minute, not sure who "we" meant. "Debts," the voice said, as if it were as simple as that. "Stupid ones, kind ones, luck. Notice, it all balances somewhere. We're just adding careful." Cloud thinned overhead the way smoke thins when a window opens. The stars stepped forward like good listeners. June's headlights found the summit sign with its modest elevation, and then the land fell away as if it had been waiting for her to be ready for that sight. The turnout with the fence showed itself, unassuming as ever, and she lifted her fingers off the wheel in the smallest wave, feeling silly and correct at the same time. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," the voice said. And if there was something like affection in it, it was the sort that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with respect. "One more thing. Of course, when you reach mile 189, there's a small gas station that looks closed but isn't," the voice said. "The lights hum like they want to be bees. The woman behind the counter loves crossword puzzles and keeps a jar of pencils no one returns. Go in, buy a pencil, leave exact change. Don't look at the journal by the register. Not tonight. Some nights you can. Not tonight." "Seems arbitrary," June said. "It is," the voice agreed. "And it isn't. Take the pencil. You'll need it in the morning when you're filling out something you forgot existed, and you'll have it because you did a silly thing here when someone you didn't understand told you to." June felt the road fractionalize into small choices and big ones, all nested like boxes you open one by one. She found herself smiling at the idea of a pencil. It felt like luck, without superstition. It felt like being in on a joke that had no loser. At mile 189, the gas station lounged in the dark like a friendly animal too big to bring into a house. The open sign flickered and then steadied, as if it were determined not to embarrass itself. She rolled in, took a pump that had seen years, and then went in not for fuel but for pencils. The woman behind the counter looked like she had always been good at keeping secrets. The jar was there, full of yellow, brand new with their thin wood smell. Just the pencil, June said, placing coins on the counter in a neat stack. The woman smiled without asking anything and passed it to her like passing a baton. On the way out, June's eye brushed the journal the way a hand might brush a sleeve. The cover was worn, the elastic band tired. She did not stop. She did not touch it. She was surprised at how much that felt like agency instead of like obedience. Back on the highway, the voice was quiet in the best way. When it returned, it was to say simple, practical things. The dawn held out a long, pale finger in the east and touched the earth with it. Night did not flee. It simply turned into something else. At the base of the pass, there was a turnout where the river forgot it was supposed to hide and showed its back to the world, glossy as a seal. June pulled in and shut down long enough to stretch her spine and feel the way the engine ticked as it cooled. She took her phone and, without thinking about why, took one picture. She did not look at it. She slid the phone into her pocket and breathed in the kind of air that makes you remember you own lungs. When she reached for the thermos, she found something tucked beneath it. A napkin, the kind from a diner that means it, folded twice. In her own handwriting, precise as if a ruler had been used on imagination, it read, "Count to 10. She felt the worry first, the way a person does when something has been inside their space without permission. Then the gratitude came, smooth and complete. She put the napkin back where it had been and pretended it had fallen from somewhere unremarkable. She could decide later how much to allow of the unlikely. The apples did not care. The road did not insist. The day was getting up. Several weeks later, on a different night, clouds stacked like books along the horizon. The CB woke again. A voice younger, more hurried, was breathing too close to the mic. "Anybody eastbound you got eyes on a trooper near the cement plant?" it asked. And then, as if without intending it, "I don't like this grade. Feels off." "Is it off?" June slid a finger beneath the microphone, feeling the weight of it the way a person feels the weight of a choice. She did not think about 11 minutes. She did not think about who was listening now, or when. She only thought of the peculiar kindness that had threaded through a night longer than it had any right to be. "Eastbound," she said, voice low and even. "Watch mile 203, right lane heaves. There's an RV in the S-curve who thinks lines are suggestions. Blink your hazards twice if you feel him too close. And, hey, when you see the old billboard with the torn corner, dim your brights. Birds are sleeping." There was a pause. She could hear Road in the other driver's cab, that soft tire song. "Copy," came the answer, equal parts relief and confusion. "Thanks. Don't mention it," she said, and the night felt like a circuit completed. Somewhere, 11 minutes away or ago, someone else made a small choice with large hands, and the road blinked in approval. At dawn, she filled out a form in a warehouse office with overhead lights that made everything look too honest. The pencil from the jar wrote smoother than it had any reason to. Near the signature, she pressed slightly too hard. The graphite left a dark stroke as if to insist. Present. She underlined her name without meaning to. The clerk did not scold. The world did not tilt. Outside, the reefer purred. The apples caught their temperature like a good note, and the highway waited with the patience of things that know they will be needed again, and again, and again. Story number 3. Fog was a rumor over the marshes long before it showed itself. The causeway ran low and straight, through miles of watergrass and black channels, lit by old sodium lamps that made everything their color golden, forgiving, not quite true. Lena hauled a sealed container for the port, the cab smelling faintly of orange hand cleaner and the paper-warm scent of a cheap pastry she saved for when her eyelids needed a small bribe. The night's air came in damp and salted through a cracked window. It taped itself along her arms and made a sheen on the steering wheel where her hands rested. The causeway was a mood as much as a road. It had its whistles, gulls that didn't sleep, freight horns from the river barges that wound through the invisible channels, the far thud of a piling being persuaded to hold something heavy. Where the lamps drew circles on the asphalt, the water glowed like dark bronze. Between those islands of light, the road went black and honest. She kept a steady speed. The container's weight sat square on the axles, the kind of correct that made a driver listen anyway. A strapped-down tarpaulin on a skiff cut across a canal far off. Its outboard sounded like a bee with a cold. The CB was on, polite and mostly unneeded. A single phrase from a pilot car far away. A cough of laughter at a joke that wasn't about anything and therefore felt safe to share. At the first mile marker of the causeway, she saw it. A shadow that didn't belong. It wasn't a thing. It was the absence of a thing. Under the lamp ahead, the dark at the base of the pole was thicker and shaped. A person shape, without a person. A trick of the eye, she told herself. The way hot air makes hills that aren't there. As the truck rolled under, the shadow shifted to the left, as if the unseen figure had leaned forward to look down the edge of the lane. Lena didn't jolt. Years teach you not to offer the wheel your heartbeat. The tires sang quietly. She watched in the mirror to see if the shape reformed behind her. It did, and it wasn't the kind of mirror-stuttering old lenses do. It was a decision the dark made to remain exactly that shape. Under the next lamp, a similar knot shape waited. It leaned in the same way, as if peering. And again, just as the hood passed under, it tilted farther left. Enough to be unmistakable, not dramatic. Lena's foot eased off the accelerator a fraction, almost entirely because she enjoyed a good puzzle. 200 yards ahead, in the pool of the third lamp, road litter glinted. A strip of a semi's blown tire lay like a black belt across part of the lane. There were dots of something else, small reflectors that might have been dropped cones or hazard triangles, except they were arranged not to block, but to chaperone. The knot shadows had not leaned for fun. She guided slightly left, eased along without drama, and the rubber strip thunked once beneath the right trailer tires instead of catching and flailing itself into trouble. In her mirror, the ghost of the lamp's dark leaned back to center, as if a conversation had gone the way it wanted to. Either I'm overtired or the lights have cousins, she said into the cab. Not a joke so much as a way of placing a thought where it could be heard by someone. The causeway ran straight for a long time, and then folded itself into a shallow S to accommodate a channel and a line of pilings that might have once held a trestle. Lena knew the places where crosswinds practiced, where the gust came not as a shove but as a hand moving a curtain. Tonight the air was a breath that had forgotten to finish. Under another lamp, another dark shape leaned, and when it did, a bird on the rail lifted off without sound, as if the air itself had tilted. The shape snapped back to plumb as she returned to her lane fully, and she found herself embarrassed to have expected terror. It was unnerving, yes, but the way airs are unnerving sudden likenesses in the face of a stranger that tell you the family isn't just blood but manner. The old toll plaza was still ahead, the kind that had once made everyone slow down and count coins or hold out their hand for a small paper that meant a payment would be due later. It had been decommissioned years before her first port run. Now it was only structures and the ghost of a rule. The overhead signs bore the peeling promise of exact change, and the booths were windows into the past. The lamps drew closer together in that section, and the knot shadows appeared under each one, a row of watchmen made from nothing. Lena thought of lighthouse keepers without a lighthouse, their attention the thing they guarded. She tested them. In the middle stretch between pools of gold, she tapped her left blinker twice, and then let it rest. When she entered the light, the dark leaned a hair more than it would have otherwise, like a nod returned. She tapped the right. The next one leaned a fraction in that direction, then corrected. Okay, she said softly. Understood. Between the lanes, a low concrete barrier ran the length, scrimmed in bird droppings and salt bloom. The sea was black like an unlit stage, and the marsh noises continued their unbroken sentence. Her transponder beeped at the sensor that wasn't supposed to be listening, and the empty booth to her right lit from within, not bright, not even fully on, but like the memory of a kitchen light turned on and immediately turned off, the afterimage of amber. In the window, a coffee cup sat and steamed as if the steam had been drawn in. A ledger lay open, its pages lined with careful columns. No one stood there. And yet a page turned gently, the corners lifting and settling as if a small breeze had chosen inside over outside. Lena kept her eyes on her lane. The causeway was nobody's place for rubbernecking. Past the plaza, the road rose a half-foot for a bridge that wasn't much of a bridge and then leveled back. The next lamp's shadow friend wasn't alone. It looked crowded, a thicker absence, and when she reached it, she saw why. A sedan sat half on the shoulder, half too far into the right lane, hood popped. The hazard lights ticked a polite rhythm. The knot shadows leaned outward like people forming a soft buffer at a buffet line, making space where space was needed. Inside the car, a car seat silhouette was faint. Not a cry, not a drama. If there was someone there, they were sleeping. Lena put her four-ways on, the slow blink that says, "I see you," as much as, "Let me be." She tapped the brakes to bleed a bit of speed without confessing it, then spoke into the CB because regardless of what the dark knew, the troopers still needed telling. "Disabled in the right after the old plaza, sedan with a hood up," she said, and gave the mile marker, simple as reading a clock. Someone answered with a calm, "Copy, 2 channels over." The knot shadows straightened as she passed, the way people do when the thing they were watching politely appreciates being noticed. The marsh tightened its hold on the night. There were places where the causeway's shoulders vanished, nothing between lane and water, but a guardrail that knew its job and also its limitations. In those places, the lamps felt taller. Lena thought of how outdated their light color was, and how much she liked it anyway. A sepia print that kept being printed. A low bell sounded twice somewhere to her left, and the next breaths of wind brought the smell of creosote and cold river. The drawbridge wasn't large, a modest piece of work that lifted for small traffic when the tide and the key masters felt friendly. A sign said there were no lifts after midnight. Another smaller one said in more honest letters that exceptions happened when they needed to. The red light on the gantry was dark, yet a barge horn sounded once, short and authoritative, from near the bend. Under the light before the bridge, the darkness gathered deep, not leaning now, but standing straight as if planting feet. Lena lifted her foot. The lanes around here invited confidence and punished theatrics. She let the truck drift down into a patience that felt like muscle memory from someone older than she was. At the next lamp, the dark became a wall, not impenetrable, just present. As the cab nosed into the neighborhood of the draw, the red gantry light clicked on and showed its correctly unpleasant color. The arms came down in a sweep, one of them stuttering where Salt had found a hinge and loved it too well. The bell went from polite to important. 30 seconds later, a low-profile tug pushed a scow through the opening, the sort of operation that looked like an accident until you recalled that waterwork is geometry done in slow motion. If she had kept her speed 2 minutes before, she would have been the sort to wonder why the night had been in such a hurry to teach her humility. She waited, air brakes whispering, lights underlighting the hood. Out on the water, a heron lifted one leg and put it down, unalarmed. The bridge lowered again, the arms raised with a grateful clack, and the knot shadows under the next lamps went from rigid to relaxed. Lena nodded the smallest nod that can be seen, which is to say she nodded entirely to herself, and rolled on. In fog, light gets its voice back in the way sound does when the power goes out in a house. The rumor became a fact a few miles later, when a low bank of it poured across the causeway like someone had opened a freezer's door. It wasn't deep, not the smothering kind. It was a layer, a blanket pulled up not quite to the chin, and it made the lamps into halos and the lane lines into ideas. This was where panic made invitations. This was where the unworried earned their pay. The knot shadows brightened by contrast. Where the pools of amber met fog, the dark under each pole felt denser, the lean more legible. At the first touch of soft white, they leaned left. Lena moved a hair left and saw why. A pallet's worth of shrink wrap had loosed itself from someone else's careless day and drifted like a jellyfish, eager to wind around anything it could. It kissed her right tire and let go like good manners. At the second, they leaned right, a longer angle, and the road bent around a snag of cones. At the third, they didn't lean at all but grew a shape taller than any a person makes without a ladder. Ahead, through the fog, a set of headlights swung too fast, too wide. The driver had had enough and wanted the night finished. Lena's trailer weighed experience. She kept her lane. The vehicle, an SUV, white, indistinguishable from simple, grazed the center line in a way that promised an apology if it were morning, then caught itself, and went on with a tail that looked embarrassed. Her breathing stayed as steady as the tatch. The horn and hand options lived and died behind her teeth. Every driver knows the flavor of anger that accompanies someone else's closeness. The trick is to let it be a flavor, and not a meal. Lamp people, she heard herself say, and felt immediately that she had borrowed someone else's name for them, from an old conversation she hadn't had yet. It fit the way a jacket does on a day you hadn't expected wind. At the last bend before the port access, the lamps marched closer, their light politer for being abundant. The knot shadows here felt like a crowd standing room only at a concert, swaying in a patience that had rhythm. Lena signaled early for the right lane into the terminal queue, and the dark under the final pole leaned satisfyingly, like bows at curtain call. The guard looked up when she rolled in. "Quiet night?" he asked, and she liked that his voice had sand in it. "It knows how to be," she said, and he smiled like the answer was exactly what he'd wanted. Her transponder chirped again, though nothing obvious had pinged it, and as she reached to hand over her paperwork, she noticed the toll chit tucked under her wiper. It was the size and color of a memory. On one side, in a block of printed text, it said nothing more remarkable than the date and an amount that matched nothing she owed. On the other, in handwriting that was tidy without being fussy, someone had written, "Safe crossing, 1. Thank you for seeing." She glanced up, half expecting to catch someone stepping back from her hood with a grin. Nothing was there but the night, which had stepped aside to let her enter. "Lose something?" the guard asked, not unkindly, seeing her look. "Found something," she answered, and slipped the paper into the thin notebook she kept for phone numbers and hand-drawn maps to motels with truck-friendly lots and rare diner hours. Some things like to be kept near other things that are used without fuss. A week later, in daylight, she took the causeway back with an empty chassis that clanked and bounced like a dog eager to run. The lamps were off. The marsh was polite and reflective, like someone whose party had finished and who was taking off their shoes in quiet joy. The old toll plaza was only concrete and the memory of coffee. On one booth's counter, a ledger sat open behind the glass in the way props sit when plays end the right page facing. The pen set down at an angle that implied interruption. No steam rose from cups. The light didn't spill from anywhere it shouldn't. She stopped at a turnout near an overgrown service road where a maintenance building crouched like a contented animal. A woman in a high-visibility vest sat on a folding chair outside, mug in hand, looking at the water like it was telling her how to be, which it probably was. "You work this stretch?" Lena asked. "Because it's good to put names in places." "Some nights," the woman said. "Some days. Depends when the rigs misbehave." She eyed Lena's rig with an appreciation that didn't require words. "You see them?" "You... I... Lena could have said what. She didn't. "I think so," she said. "Under the lamps." The woman took a sip. "Lamp people. That's what my grandfather called them. He worked the booth. He said even when the power went, the shadows kept their posts. They don't like noise. They don't like showing off. They'll lean if you're already paying attention. If you aren't, they won't waste their time." Lena felt a half smile in a place below her mouth. "They stopped me for the draw," she said. "They did," the woman agreed like she had been there. "Saved a boat and a driver. A headache likely. Folks think all the Marvels are loud. Funny." The woman set her mug down on a square of cardboard. "There's a plaque," she said after a moment, tilting her chin toward the base of one of the lampposts. "Tiny thing, nobody sees it. Says a name and a date. My grandfather fell from a ladder in the 70s. Broke nothing but his confidence. Sat right where you're sitting for a week and watched the lamps. Said they were doing his job without him. Went back to work anyway until they closed the booths. After he passed, Mom put the plaque there. Nobody complained. I think the marsh likes it when we label things we loved." Quietly, Lena walked over and found it exactly where described. A small brass square screwed into concrete. The name like any name. The date a little too far back to be useful. No grand claim. Just the essentials. She touched it with the back of her fingers, a gesture that felt accidental and right. Driving back that night, Early fog laid down again. Out past the first mile marker, a hazed glow gathered, and the lamp people went back to their shifts. A semi behind her floated too close, that eager tailgating that comes from a clock that has not been fed. She saw the dark under the next lamp lean sharply left and then hold, a posture of warning. She eased her speed and clicked her 4 ways twice, the small language of the road. In the mirror, the other rig steadied, its eagerness combed by the hint. Then something heavier than fog moved across the asphalt far ahead, no shape. Only a darker strip where the light was suddenly swallowed. The lamp people leaned toward each other like neighbors, with something to tell. A convoy of maintenance vehicles, lights off for reasons known to those who light them, crossed from a service lane without expectation of company. No harm, no drama. But they did not expect a truck right at that moment, not because they didn't know better, but because the causeway makes people forget anyone else owns it. The rigs adjusted without tears in the fabric. The moment was a close shave in the way a barber makes the blade sing, and you leave with skin intact and oddly grateful. The lamp people straightened in a tide motion. Later, in a diner that still had slices of pie sitting in a glass case like exhibits, a driver with hands like baseball mitts and a voice that had eaten gravel by choice told a story about the causeway. "Light's funny out there," he said, not fishing for disbelief. "I queued up once behind a fella who threw coins at the empty booth like he was trying to wake himself, and the arm went up. There ain't been an arm on that thing in 20 years. Sometimes the place hands you a permission you didn't ask for." Nobody argued. The waitress refilled coffee and tucked the pot under her arm like a toddler. When Lena made the crossing in daylight again a month later, one lamp near the draw was out. The pole's shadow fell fat and honest across the lane. The plaque was shining from a cleaning someone had given it. She left a paper cup of coffee at the base, lid on, not for anyone to drink, but because she knew the point of some offerings is the arranging, not the consuming. The fog, on another night, thickened to the sort that scrubs away depth and gives you the world as one big white wall with a road drawn on it. The lamp people became bolder by contrast, their leans like semaphores. There was a moment when her breath shortened to the thin breathing of someone who doesn't want to disturb a sleeping house. She followed the lean, one pool to the next, never stepping on the black, never forcing the gold, and the causeway carried her over itself like a careful host carries a tray through a crowd. At the far end, a crane turned on its cradle, slow, important, confident the night was its own. Lena rolled into the stack lanes, set the brake, and let the engine tick as it cooled. In the mirror, she saw herself, ordinary and helpable. On the glass, the toll chit leaned where she'd slipped it earlier in the week. A new one was tucked beside it, as if paper has decided to breed when content. The hand that had written before had written again, the tidy script now with a small flourish at the end. Exact change not required. She laughed, quietly, because nothing had been owed beyond attention, and attention she had in decent supply. The marsh sang once, a sound like air being plucked, and fell back into its quilt of noises. The night, pleased, closed its ledger. The lamp people would not be in any manual. They would be spoken about over bitter coffee and decent eggs, or not at all, because sometimes the telling makes a thing get shy. But drivers who looked sideways, who learned that safety and grace live in the same hand, would learn to see the lean and translate it into space and breath. The causeway would continue to be a road and a rumor, and both would be true. Story number 4. The canyon road at night was a ribbon of careful light. Ortega kept his rig steady through the curves, drywall stacked tight in the box, the strap singing a low, almost musical thread whenever the crosswind looked his way. The dash glowed like patient embers. A peppermint he had meant to save for the last hour worked its way into his cheek and stayed there, cooling the breath he exhaled into the cab. Out here, the radio stations came and went like weather. A distant voice read a forecast in a tone that suggested everything could be handled, even the surprise gusts that tested mirrors and nerves. Ortega kept the CB open and quiet. The microphone hung like a good tool, reachable, not needed. He liked this route, the way the desert eased up and let the land gather itself into stone, the way the road threaded a crack in that stone and called it a pass. He knew the turnouts and the signs with bullet pox and the rest area where the vending machines talked to themselves at 3 a.m. He knew exactly how the truck felt when the grade stiffened and then gave back its demand. If there was a place on his regular run that felt like it had its own opinion, it was this one. Fletcher Narrows, the placard said, as if naming a thing could make it polite. He set his mirrors the way he always did. The big rectangles gave him the world he had left behind. The convex, West Coast mirrors leaned out on their chrome arms like curious listeners. In the passenger mirror, the lane behind him was a pale stripe, bordered with reflectors that winked like a patient constellation. Every few minutes he checked, not because he doubted, but because seeing confirmed that everything he'd already done was still true. The first oddness was simple. In the passenger mirror, a pair of headlights appeared, one just slightly dimmer than its twin. They were far back small, with that soft glow that turns into a car only when it decides to. Ortega flicked a glance forward again. The roadway ahead was empty. The curve drew him, the grade asked its careful question, and he answered with his right foot. By habit, he counted a slow 5 and looked again. The headlights in the mirror had grown. He moved his gaze to the windshield, up the road where the canyon opened for a bit, where an on-ramp slipped in from a county road. A sedan slid into view there, humble and white, the right headlamp duller than the left. He wouldn't have noticed the broken bulb on any other night. Tonight it felt as if the mirror had introduced them, then waited to be thanked. He drove on. Chalk lines on the rock face looked like the palimpsest of old routes. The current road followed its own thread, refusing drama. A sign with a falling rock icon wore a sticker that gave the boulder eyes and a small smile. Somebody with night shifts had tried to domesticate danger and done a decent job of it. In the mirror again, he saw grit hatch across the lane. Not a wall of it, just a scuffing, the little pebbles that draw a quiet letter S as they scrim across asphalt. Up ahead, the concrete lip where water once ran was dry and the shoulder narrow. He eased. A pickup far up the curve kicked a scatter of stones. They ticked faintly under his tires and were gone. The mirror had told it before it happened. He decided to take the gift by not naming it. Fletcher Narrows did its long bend rightward, then left again as if it were a snake trying not to wake something. Sleeping. Ortega settled into the rhythm. The peppermint cooled his mouth. He rolled it with his tongue and wondered if the menthol had him too alert, if that could even be said. In the passenger mirror, far back, a pair of amber marker lights blinked, then steadied the top corners of another tractor's cab. It was so normal it felt like proof the night wasn't trying to be special. A minute later, the CB coughed to life. Eastbound, you got that crosswind kissing at 77? A voice asked, polite, older, not bored. Ortega pressed the talk button. Westbound here. It's teasing us. Nothing rude. He let the mic drop back into its cradle and returned his eyes to the one place excuses don't help. He checked the passenger mirror again and frowned, not because of anything dramatic, but because of how particular the glass had decided to be. A shaded smear had appeared near the far right edge, like a thumbprint from a careful hand. In the smear, shapes were slightly earlier versions of themselves, cars a little farther back than they ought to be, reflectors blinking on before the truck's lights reached them, even his own trailer's marker glow, a fraction delayed. He blinked, and the smear stayed. He tested a hypothesis without telling himself he was doing it. He let his blinker click 3 times, each interval a metronome in the cab, then touched the stalk down as if to lane change and immediately brought it back. In the mirror, for a breath of a breath, he thought he saw the amber arrow wink before his finger had touched anything. Not proof. A suggestion. Ahead, the canyon pinched to its narrowest. The walls came in like steady shoulders. The road offered the briefest of passing lanes, the kind that tempted and punished. Ortega held his line. In the passenger mirror, the smear glowed like the inside of a seashell, subtle, cool. A vertical white thing took shape there, tall and thin like a lit rectangle. Half a minute later, a maintenance truck appeared in front of him around the next bend. Its rear panel, a reflective stripe board with tiny running lights, the exact ragged rectangle his mirror had teased. The truck's aero board was dark, its presence more about a promise to work later than about work now. He drifted left within his lane, nodded into the windshield, and returned, as if the truck could sense courtesy. He reached a turnout where a call box sat, yellowed with sun and use. The door was closed. A waist-high crate next to it held sand, petrified into a brick by rare rain. He passed. The peppermint was gone. He missed its cold and did not reach for another. The night asked him not to be greedy. Between marker 76 and 78, There was a section of wall where the rock came down in sheets like layered pastry. In daylight, it looked appetizing. At night, it looked like the kind of structure that would always hold because it had been holding a very long time and was proud of the resume. He passed under it and felt the tiny muscles in his hands account for weight again. The mirror's smear shaded the world one tone deeper and then cleared, as if a cloth had been lifted. The CB picked up a fragment. "Brake check at the east pullout," a voice said. It had the sound of someone doing their best with a job that requires a high tolerance for being ignored. Ortega said nothing. The brake check was the other side of the hill, and his concern later, not now. Then the mirror did something he would tell no one about for weeks, because saying it out loud felt like tempting the part of the world that doesn't like to be named. In the passenger glass, beyond the convex curve where the ribbon of lane lifted and fell with the canyon's breathing, a pale bloom rose. It looked like dust lit from within, like the ghost of a splash in a dark lake. His body did what training does when it is old and dry and practiced. He eased off gently, letting the weight speak before the brakes did. 5 seconds. 10 then from ahead. From the left. At the base of a cut face where rain had gnawed a seam, gravel let go. Not a drama of boulders, just a polite shedding. A cat, slipping off a windowsill. The stones hissed across the near lane and ticked out in the darkness. His wheels rolled them under and they were nothing. And yet he knew the mirror had told him, and knew also that the timing had been tidy enough to be called the same moment with two faces. "Whoever cleaned this glass, thank you," he said to nobody, and immediately felt ridiculous, then immediately felt better for having tried to be courteous to an unknown kindness. He pulled into the tiny rest turnout, where the canyon relented for exactly long enough to park one rig and let the driver stretch. He did not climb down. He idled, watched the tatch settle, and reached to set his drink in the cup holder. On the passenger side, along the chrome bracket where the mirror arm met the door, someone had scratched a line into the metal with something sharp. Not words, not real ones. A line, a little notch above it, another beside. It could have been nothing. It could have been an arrow. It pointed forward, not back. It made him laugh once, softly. He'd never noticed it. He thought about adjusting the mirror, tapping its rim to move the glass by a hair. He didn't. He set his hands on the wheel, where the leather had polished under his thumbs, and let the engine's low hum stack itself into the quiet. Back on the road, the night lifted slightly, as if pleased with him for not pushing. Fletcher Narrows did its final bend, and then uncoiled, the grade giving back what it had taken. He checked his left mirror, out of fairness. It gave him exactly what it should. The road, his trailer, the future turning into past at an even rate. In the passenger mirror, the smear had gone. Things looked ordinary, the same flavor as the glass on the driver's side. Ortega exhaled. Sometimes nerves invent patterns because they hate the idea that they are not in the conversation. Half a mile later, the smear returned like a breath drawn in. The world beyond it softened by a fraction. A chalky pall lifted where the canyon widened. He leaned his shoulder back against the seat because he realized he had moved slightly forward without noticing. Anticipation is a way the body tries to be helpful. The CB someone else had left on open picked up a weather radio in a county far off. The mechanical voice said the word advisory with genuine care. Ortega turned it down until the world returned to sounds he knew well. Wind on mirror brackets, tires telling their neat story, a tail of chain on a securement post, making the gentlest knock now and again as if to remind itself it existed. The mirror bloomed again. Not dust now. Light, but not from a vehicle. A white that wasn't harsh, like chalk dissolved in water. Ahead, the road did a small right bend, and then a shallow left, and beyond that was the bluff that had been cut to make it all possible. Ortega eased more, careful not to turn courtesy into caution that would get in someone else's way. A shadow lifted off the left wall and hung for a breath. He knew that movement. The state had posted signs about it. Fall hazard, nothing you could schedule, rock that had decided it had done enough time as wall. He pressed the pedal and felt the trailer accept the suggestion, weight migrating as smoothly as old dancers moving into the next step. Small pebbles clicked and were lost. And then there was a sound like a bag of lentils tossed from a table. Many small, none decisive, all together enough to turn a good tire into an irritated one. It happened half a football field in front of him, and by the time he reached the place, it had already finished its idea. He passed over the thin remaining scatter, without even the need to consider stopping. It had been nothing. It had been something that might have been more. At the bottom of the stretch, where the canyon let go, a cluster of lights waited by a dirt turnout. The kind of lights used by crews, who spend nights keeping a road honest. A portable arrow board blinked, lazy and content, pointing traffic around them, though there was nothing yet to go around. Men and women in reflective vests stood near cones, their faces as readable as stars at that distance, not readable at all. A truck with a belly full of gravel sat open-mouthed, ready. He passed them and realized they were pointed the other way, staged for work on the eastbound side. He felt, briefly, like he'd watched a rehearsal take place then leave him the stage. In town, he parked under a light that was not a moon, and walked across a lot that remembered summer in the way heat rises from asphalt even at midnight. He washed his hands at a sink in a dying truck stop, where the mirror had a small crack at the lower left that made his face look briefly surprised every time. He ate eggs he did not need, and listened to a much younger driver talk about brakes with the passion of someone who had just learned to name their parts. He said nothing. He had left the canyon. You don't spend your day off explaining dreams. 2 days later he came through again, eastbound this time, and the wind went the other way. The passenger mirror's smear did not appear. The glass behaved. The world was as later as it ought to be. He didn't push. He didn't test. He kept his lane. He kept his schedule. He kept his mouth shut about anything that could make a good night get shy. A week after that, he rolled into a parts shop at the edge of a gravel lot to buy washer fluid and a new wiper blade. He mentioned, in the way people mention whether to be polite, that his passenger mirror had been acting laggy. The parts man, who wore an expression like a door that has learned exactly how much it should stick in summer, looked up and then out at the rig. You running the old Harmon West arm? He asked, as if asking about a cousin. Seems so, Ortega said. He didn't know. The truck had come to him with what it had. Those brackets came through a salvage lot years back, the man said, rummaging in a drawer for something else and finding instead a story. Driver who ran the Narrows a lot. Kept swapping his passenger glass after a hailstorm took a chunk out. Said the replacement made him feel like he was seeing ahead. Folks rolled their eyes. Then somebody else said it. Then another. Then nobody said it anymore. You know how it goes. What goes? Ortega asked, knowing. The sort of thing roads do for themselves when we're not mean to them, the man said, as if defining a bolt's thread count. He handed over the wiper blade. You can swap it if you want. I'd keep it. Ortega kept it. Winter made its slow way into the pass. The advisory voice took on a tone that meant chains later. Not now. On a late night with the sky low and clean, he entered Fletcher from the west, and the mirror breathed, subtle as ever. He felt a gust where the canyon narrows and didn't fight it because he could feel how much a fight would insult the physics. In the glass, a faint blink of hazard lights showed against the rock, a reflection of something not yet around the curve. He put his four-ways on once, twice, then left them off, a private nod. When he came to the bend, a compact car sat half on the shoulder, snow-dusted though snow had not yet found the road. The driver stood at the rail, phone high, trying to beg a bar of reception out of stingy air. Ortega eased, gave the lane as much as it could give without removing it from anyone else. The man looked without seeing, the way people look when they know the night is doing them a favor, and are trying not to jinx it. The mirror was plain after that. The smear went, returned, went again. The canyon kept its terrain and its secrets. At a turnout for a scenic view no one sees at night, he stopped and stepped down. The air was cold enough that silence made a sound. On the backside of the passenger mirror's bracket, he felt the scratches with a gloved finger. The arrow wasn't an arrow, not exactly. Perhaps it was a tally. Perhaps it was a prior driver keeping count of nights when the glass had told him something and he had listened and not regretted it. 4 marks, then a space, then 2, then a clean metal where more could have been. He took out a coin, quarter bright in the lot light, and pressed its edge into the chrome just above the marks, not to make a new one, not exactly. He drew the smallest line a coin can make. It was not a declaration. It was respect. In spring, he ran with a new hand in the jump seat for a leg kid with a neat cap and a mind that wanted to be told secrets. The canyon took them in. Ortega said nothing about mirrors. At the narrowest part, the passenger glass softened the world the way fog softens a corner of a field in morning. A pale bloom rose in it, and the kid drew in breath to ask a question that would make the moment shut itself like a book. "Blink your hazards twice," Ortega said softly, and the kid did without asking why, because the voice in the driver's seat had that certain weight. Ahead, a deer that had been considering a crossing changed its mind. The animal delaminated from shadow and slipped back into cooler dark, not startled, only inconvenienced. The kid exhaled and didn't ask after all. Somewhere in the rig, a strap creaked and settled again. After a delivery that ended in a warehouse as bright and cold as the inside of a cloud, they parked for a few hours at a pullout where the sun came low and early and set the canyon rim on fire. The kid asked then, simply, because someday, everyone asks, "What's with the mirror?" "It tells me the sensible version," Ortega said. "Just a little sooner than I deserve." The kid nodded as if that were technical. Maybe it was. On a list he kept in his head of places where the world is fond of particular tools. The ways some rivers speak more plainly to wooden boats. The way some lanes are kinder to old motorcycles. The way some alleys only open for feet that have worn good shoes. Fletcher Narrows became the place where a passenger mirror was more than glass. He did not put it in a manual. He did not write it down next to torque specs. He did not make it heroic. He simply kept his lane, checked the glass, and let the quiet messages mean exactly as much as they needed to, not more. One summer day, a sign went up. "Work ahead. Slope stabilization." For a month, the crew hung from the walls like careful ornaments and pinned loose rock. The mirror was ordinary then. It showed exactly what it should, and not one piece beyond, as if satisfied that humans had decided to let gravity know they were paying attention. When the work was done and the cones were stacked and hauled, the smear returned once in a while, like an old friend stepping into a room, looking around, and deciding the company was good. Years later, Ortega bought a newer truck and transferred everything he could. He stood with the old one for a long time, hand on the passenger mirror, as if it were a shoulder, then undid the bolts and took the arm and glass off together. The chrome had dulled in a graceful way. He left the bracket in his shed as if it were a photograph. Once, he thought of hanging it on the wall and pointing at it when a story demanded a prop. He didn't. Some things get shy when displayed. If pressed, he would say that the canyon is not haunted. He would say it is attentive. He would say he has never met a road that didn't prefer to be kept in the company of those who look twice. Sometimes that preference finds a way to talk. Sometimes it uses a small piece of glass and a little breath of a second to do it. He still glanced at the passenger mirror, even years later on different runs. Not to summon anything. Just to confirm the world was behaving, and to be ready for when it decided to be kind ahead of schedule. The road hummed. The straps sang their quiet songs. And he kept his hands easy, ready to meet whatever arrived a heartbeat early or exactly on time. Grateful either way. Story number 5. The plains at night were a flat ocean that had forgotten how to be water. Harper's headlights drew a steady lane on it, and the wind rubbed the rig like a big cat deciding whether to be affectionate. The dash clock kept a civilized time, no minutes running away, no warnings, just the small comfort of numbers behaving. Harper hauled a mixed pallet, a little of everything bound for a distribution center, the color of a cloudy morning. The reefer's low hum was company. The CB was on without being loud, like a porch light left for luck. He'd topped his tanks at a farm town stop where the clerk wore an old cap with a faded compass rose stitched on it, an emblem from a trucking company that had been folded into somebody else long before Harper took his CDL. "Wind's got a left-hand mood," the man had said, handing over change as if he were handing over a forecast. "If you see the Red Star boys, tuck in and let 'em do their thing." Harper had smiled at that. The plains have their folklore and their little spells. He didn't intend to need any tonight. The sky was clear, a low-slung dome of navy. The stars, steady as pushpins. Wind turbines dotted the horizon like tall white shepherds, their red beacons winking in a slow choreography no one admitted to counting. He put the miles behind him in an orderly way. The long straightaways made a pocket of their own kind of calm, no mountains to argue with, no city to manage. He kept to 61, a speed the load liked and the wind tolerated. The tire song softened to a steady brush that felt more like a lullaby than a warning. A flicker touched the far edge of his vision. Hazard lights, a pair, then a second pair, far ahead, amber winks quiet as fireflies. He slid his gaze to the windshield and saw them proper. 3 rigs, evenly spaced, riding the gentle grade like a thought someone had decided to finish. Their hazards were on, not frantic, just present. No other cars few crossed this stretch at this hour, unless a clock somewhere had insisted. He reached for the mic. 3. With markers on north of the 220, everything all right? He asked. Voice low out of habit. Silence. Not dead silence, there was always a little weather whisper and the occasional bleed from someone's oldies station, but no talk came back with a face on it. He tried again on a side channel. Nothing. Closer, the leading trailer's door showed an emblem he had seen on hats and coffee cups in old truck stop display cases. A red star nested in a thin white compass rose, North Star carriers in a font that belonged to a decade with fewer digital clocks. The paint was crisp. The reflective striping was new, or looked it. The 3 tractors were not the shapes of the latest models, but they weren't relics either. The sort of bodies that still read as trucks in a child's drawing. Long-nosed, clean, proud by accident. He fell in a few car lengths behind the last rig, giving them the comfort he himself liked. Their hazards blinked in a pattern that made a rhythm without making a fuss. 2 blinks. A pause. 1 blink. 2. Pause. 1. He found, after a half mile, that the wind came differently back here, as if it had been combed. The big sideways hands of the gusts still came, but they arrived with their fingers together, not splayed. A tumbleweed rolled up and thought better of it. The lead truck's brake lights breathed a fraction and then let go. A sign you give another driver when you're paying attention, but you don't want to startle. The convoy's speed stayed a steady 61. Harper matched. He didn't have to press the throttle as much as he had been. There's a way 3 semis can move air for a 4th if they want to. He felt it work on him like somebody opening a door at the right time. The hazards shifted. 1 blink, pause. 1 blink, pause, 2. The pattern wasn't Morse, he knew that enough. To be sure, it wasn't a message he could spell. It felt more like a metronome being nudged a little to mark something ahead. The road sign for a broad, shallow curve appeared. An arrow as long as a school bus lay on the panel. The crosswind that had been a patient hand became a coaxing palm. The lead truck hugged the white line a hair more than a line-hugging man would want to declare. The second did the same, and Harper let the same thought pass through his hands to the wheel. The wind spilled cleanly. He imagined birds hanging in that air and not being ruffled. They reached a county line marked by a small sign no one ever took a picture with. The turbine stood closer here. Red beacon steady. The convoy's hazards pulsed in time once a momentary alignment. Harper wouldn't have believed if someone had tried to sell it to him. He had no intention of believing anything dramatic about lights, but the feeling of being ushered was hard to ignore. A pickup with a camper shell came up fast behind him, brimful of impatience. Its high beams wrote their name on his mirrors for no reason besides needing to be seen. Harper did nothing. He signaled right and gave the lane its space as the passing lane appeared. The pickup moved into it, then drifted too close when the wind sighed. The center rig, not the leader, not the caboose, put on its left indicator for 2 beats, and then turned it off. It was not a command, because nobody commands anyone in a moment like that. It was an angle of attention. The pickup's driver blipped his brakes and snapped into a cleaner line, as if someone had handed him a ruler. He passed without drama and was gone, his red taillights shrinking like a promise that would be kept out of sight. Harper raised his hand absently, a wave anybody could have read, and returned it to the wheel. The convoy's hazards resumed their quiet mathematics. The land rolled in small ways that did not need games of gear, and the night above held steady. 5 miles on, a low plank bridge crossed a creek that disguised itself as a dune of grass. The approach to it had a seam that rose to meet you if you hit it wrong. The lead truck's hazards went long blink, then rested. The leader eased without fanfare. Harper floated the seam with exactly the amount of care that would keep pallet corners from testing their straps. He thought, not for the first time, that if you reduced all the good decisions on the road to one, it would be this. Leave yourself room to be surprised. At a fuel station by a lonely interchange, a single canopy light made a pale stage for a soda machine and a sign about hours that meant nothing at midnight. The place looked kindly closed. In the glass, he caught the convoy reflected. 3 clean rigs, hazards writing their soft code, not a bug smear on any of their grills. He did not expect bugs in this season, but there are always a few. Their windshields were stories that apparently didn't need telling. The name North Star looked less like a brand and more like a decision. He tried the CB again. "North Star on the 90? You got a copy?" he asked, just to satisfy the little itch. The speaker crackled once, nothing that sounded like any human throat, and returned to its low electronic patience. Harper tapped the mic against his knee and let it hang. His instrument lights painted soft rectangles on his hands. The reefer purred its small round purr. His log ticked its digit to the right with a little nod. The hazards changed again, 2 short, 1 long, then still. 30 seconds later, they came upon a part of the road that looked the same as the rest until it didn't. The wind had laid debris from someone's bad day. Plastic wrap like shy jellyfish. A rubber strap that had learned how to be a snake. The lead truck rode exactly the temporary seam between the shoulder and the lane, and the trash bowed away from its wake like wheat. The second drifted a hair left, avoiding something invisible but surely there. Harper ran the space they opened, clean as if it had been vacuumed. The rubber strap reached for his front tire and then remembered its manners and stayed flat. The next town named itself with a sign and then kept its buildings a polite distance from the highway. A water tower in the shape of a capsule bore the high school team name. The fields around it were winter clean and made for seeing long thoughts, not short ones. The convoy's speed never varied by more than a breath. Harper glanced at his fuel range, unnecessary reassurance, then watched the cluster of red lights on the horizon do what they do. Wink, wait, wink. Once, when the road ran slightly downhill and the night got the idea to be helpful, Harper took his foot off the accelerator entirely just to feel the difference. The convoy seemed to pull him along by will alone. It wasn't much, nothing a scale would notice, but it was there. A draft and not a draft. He imagined air as a river and 3 prows moving through it with enough confidence to split it neatly. He should have been bored. He was not. The planes do something rare for a mind. They give it enough to watch without demanding it perform. He thought of a trucker he'd met at a health inspection 2 winters back, who carried a laminated card in his wallet from a company safety meeting decades ago. It had rules printed on it, the kind you expect. Keep distance, use signals, mind weather. The card ended with one line the man had smiled at as he read it to Harper: never ride alone. At the corner of his eye, the convoy's hazard blinkers settled into a new cadence. 1 short, 1 short, 2 long, then nothing for a while. After that, 1 short again. He realized he was anticipating the pattern, the way you anticipate a chorus in a song, ready to be folded into it. A train paralleled them far off, its own lights arranged in a neat little procession. The sound took a long time to cross the empty distance, and when it did, it arrived as a low throat singing, friendly to the night. The lead truck's brake lights breathed a fraction and then let go. Ahead, a culvert passed under the highway. A fox, pale as if someone had moonlight in a bucket and had poured it on, crossed from fence line to fence line unhurried. None of the drivers touched their horns. Harper felt, freshly, how loud a horn is in the middle of the ocean. At mile marker 313, a reflective green sign that nobody ever hands to tourists ticked by. The next, miles later, read the same number. He glanced at his GPS, then at the marker, then back again. His arrow crawled forward like a snail, ungossipy. He told himself he had misread the paint on the sign. He told himself it meant nothing. The convoy's hazards made no case. The wind put a palm on the trailer and held it steady so that whatever argument the mind wanted to start, the body could keep doing its work. They came to a rise from which the world opened in a way that made distance look both intimate and indifferent. Out there, where the darkness stopped being a wall and became a floor, tiny stitches of light showed a sleeping town. A billboard that sold an idea nobody needed at this hour told itself a quiet story to the grass. The lead rig's right blinker clicked twice, a real signal this time, and the convoy drifted to the right-hand lane in perfect grace, as if a string ran between them. Harper followed, not wanting to be the one to pull at it. A wide load crawled onto the interstate from a graded ramp, its escort car tidy with its little light bar polite as a librarian's cough. The 3 North Star rigs folded around the wide load effortlessly, 2 staying back, the first easing ahead to open the lane. It was like watching experienced dancers let someone new onto a floor without embarrassment. The wide loads driver didn't look left or right. The work of keeping it inside the lines was enough. The hazard rhythm a few vehicles wore together felt briefly like language, and Harper felt included in a sentence he hadn't learned yet. He thought of the cap on the clerk back at the gas station. He thought of never ride alone. He thought of how certain companies became myths, for reasons too mundane to tell cleanly. He remembered he hadn't, and then he did that a story had traveled the way stories do. A whiteout. A long time ago. This very stretch. A string of trucks from that Red Star outfit had made a rope of hazard lights for others to follow when the world turned into milk, and no one stopped being careful until Day told them they could. After, the company had gone the way of many scooped into a bigger name, warehouses emptied without drama, paint sanded down off trailers for someone else to wear. The story had stayed, even if it changed shoes. He glanced at the time. He'd been with the convoy just under an hour. The clock had good manners. He didn't feel robbed or gifted. He felt paced. At the county where the wind farm thickened like a stand of trees, the road widened to 4 lanes. The convoy didn't scatter or speed. It flowed. Hazard lights slowed, then stilled. For the first time, the lead truck's right turn signal came on for a proper exit, a farm road off-ramp that no highway planner had intended for trucks in the long view. The second followed. The third put its hazards to a gentle blink like a small wave from a porch and joined them. Harper, without being instructed, stayed on the highway, his exit half a state yet. He looked right because everyone does when something leaves. The farm road led toward a low square of darkness that resolved into a big metal shed, and beyond it, a yard too neat to be abandoned and too quiet to be busy. An old sign, barely reflective, hung at the chain-link gate. It had letters that made themselves readable when the eye wanted to let the rest of the world blur. North Star Carriers Yard 4. A smaller placard below it read, Authorized Vehicles Only. Below that, in the paint ghost left by sun on metal when another sign had been removed years back, he could read the memory of a word, Dispatch. The 3 rigs slid into the yard with no fuss or flourish. The gate did not swing. The chain did not move. For a flicker of a flicker, he thought he saw figures on the far side, just densities where light wasn't, not faces, not color turned to look at what had come home. Then the hazard lights went dark. The yard took back its shape, and the off-ramp shoulder was a strip of gravel like any other strip of gravel. The wind changed. Only a little. It shifted from left hand to something more frontal, honest and less cunning. The red beacons on the turbines blinked and then lost their temporary choir and returned to their own quiet timing. Harper's cab felt bigger by a breath. The CB picked up a weather radio again for a moment and whispered about gusts likely at 4 in the morning on a route he wasn't on. He rolled on. The lane held. The road was simple again. It had never stopped being simple, he supposed, but something inside him had unfolded, and now was flat. He felt the absence the way you feel when a semi in your blind spot turns its lights off your mirror. You know it left because something stops insisting. At the next rest area, he pulled in for the kind of pause that isn't about fatigue. He set the brake. The engine ticked like a bug cooling. He stepped down, and the prairie air touched his face in a way that made him aware of the line of his jaw, and nothing else in particular. The vending machines glowed like polite aquariums. A semi idled 2 spaces down, its driver asleep in the safe, curled way of someone who trusted their pillow. On the catwalk, near the rear corner of his cab, lodged under the tension of a bungee he hadn't moved since the last load, was a narrow rectangle of plastic. The sort of tag safety managers hang on clipboards. Red Star. White compass rose. North Star Carriers. On the back, the kind of language that had lived in company break rooms since clipboards had been invented. Remember, 60. 1 inches high winds. Never ride alone. Someone had scuffed the plastic enough to make the letters look older than the tag. Harper didn't make a surprise sound because the night didn't deserve to have its mood punctured. He didn't look for camera tricks or someone's idea of a prank. He slid the tag into the small map pocket next to the seat and let it live there as if it had always been. He took out his phone, pressed the camera, and took one picture of the night with the turbines holding their red stars out for anyone who liked to count. He didn't look at it. He put the phone back. He drank the last inch of coffee from the thermos. It was neither warm nor cold, but it tasted like a good resource. When he pulled back out, the shoulder at the on-ramp looked briefly different in the mirror, a faint suggestion of tracks, where tracks had no reason to be. They made the shape 3 rigs in a row would make, if they had all agreed on the same line. By the time he settled at 61 again, the shoulder had decided to be plain gravel, which is what shoulders like to be when left alone. In a diner 2 days later where the ceiling tiles held stars of their own water stains, an old man with a half-remembered North Star logo on his jacket nursed a cup. He was the shape drivers take when they've traded in schedules for stories. He said to nobody in particular, "You run the prairie? If the Red Star outfits glide by you in the small hours, tuck in. They don't ask much. They've been doing that since a storm took the horizon away. Company's gone, sure. Roads remember better than people need to." No one argued. The waitress topped him up without asking, a habit born of wanting to keep hands busy when good things are being said. Wind has a way of going where it wants. On some nights, when it came from a certain quadrant, Harper would see 2 amber winks way ahead and feel calm, arrive before any advice did. On other nights, there was nothing but the honest brush of tires and the steadiness of 6 illuminated needles and the country's idea of sleep rolling out flat and reasonable in front of him. He didn't look for them. He didn't ask. He just held space for the possibility that he could be paced by quiet company who asked him to do nothing more heroic than mind his speed and keep to his lane. That was the kind of haunting he could live with. Not a demand, not a trick, just a presence that turned a long stretch of dark into a thing shaped by care. If anyone asked later about the tag in his map pocket, he might say it came in a box of weirdo freebies out of a warehouse's back shelf. He might shrug. He might hand it to a new driver and say, "It's a good slogan," and let them decide whether or not to keep it. The road would do what it does. Keep its counseling quiet. Show its signals only to those who are already looking. And, sometimes, offer a convoy to those who would not ask for one, because it's hard to ask for something you can't name. On nights when the stars above the plains were particularly assertive, the beacons on the turbines looked like red commas. The sentence didn't end. It just paused and went on. Harper drove. The compass in his chest settled. The wind did what it would. The ocean of grass slept without moving, and the highway, pleased to be useful, held him up like a hand. Story number 6. The cat's eyes on the highway were awake. Out on the basalt flats where the high desert spread itself thin and the sky kept all the stars it could carry, Rowan drove with the kind of care that lets the mind roam and the hands stay honest. The trailer behind him held nothing theatrical paper, dry goods, a pallet of dish soap that smelled faintly sharp when the reefer cycled. His speed was steady. The engine purred. Heat lightning stitched the far horizon without thunder, sowing light into distant cloud that never quite agreed to rain. He'd cut east off a lonelier highway and picked up this 2-lane ribbon that knew exactly where it was going and had no reason to prove it. The CB was on low, a friendly hiss and the occasional far-off voice talking about wind. Distant weather radio bled through once with the phrase, "outflow boundary," in a voice that sounded like it had the same bedtime every night. Rowan liked this stretch at this hour. No towns, no billboards trying too hard. The road was marked with reflective buttons set into the center line at regular, mathematical intervals. They looked like small, watchful pupils under his high beams. He had not given them a thought since he learned to drive, the way people don't think about door hinges unless they squeak. Then the line ahead of him moved, not the asphalt. The cat's eyes themselves. The tiny white squares passive, obedient, seemed to wink, one after another. A ripple, like someone running a finger along piano keys. It was subtle. If he had blinked, if he had rolled down the window at exactly that second, and the sound of the wind had filled his head, he might have missed it. But he didn't. He saw a wave run in the reflectors ahead, from far to near, quick as a fish darting under a dock. The effect wasn't bright. It was a change in caught light, as if the road had decided to show its own pulse. He drove 2 breaths. The ripple repeated. "Heat mirage," he said out loud, polite to his own doubt. Headlight bounce. Something in my mind wanting to be a runway. He had grown up under an airport approach path. He knew the way sequenced flashers, the rabbit ran at the edge of a runway to ease pilots into places their bodies couldn't feel. The memory made sense here only because the desert was wide and the night generous. He tapped the stalk and dimmed his brights. half expecting the effect to vanish when his light softened. The buttons wavered less, then steadied into a stillness that looked more like manners than physics. He brought the brights back up. The wave returned, not dramatic, but undeniable, a soft urging moving down the road toward him. Rowan eased a hair off the accelerator. He scanned the dark for the ordinary reasons a road might point itself. An animal, a vehicle, debris. The horizon was clean. The sagebrush on the shoulders stood in polite, low clumps. The sky pulsed again with silent lightning. The wave ran. He realized it wasn't down the center line. It was angled. The cat's eyes glowed in a sequence that drifted toward the right, a neat push, as if a professional hand were showing him a seat and asking him to slip farther over. He let the rig slide a foot toward the white line without making drama of it. 30 yards ahead, something dark lay low across the raw heart of his lane, invisible until it was framed perfectly by his high beams. Roping. A coil with hooks at either end. A broken strap, longer than a man is tall. It would have loved to tire. He breathed, good, and missed it. The reflector's little runway pulling him over to safety with the kind of help that never introduces itself. Fine, he said, because when somebody helps, a person should say something, even if it's only to the wheel. For a half mile, the cat's eyes behaved like the cat's eyes he had always trusted. Solid, passive, correct. He almost convinced himself he had seen nothing but a trick of light and his own family of memories. Then the wave ran again, this time from behind him, like someone tapping a shoulder. It flowed forward in a neat, quiet current. When it reached the shape of his hood, it curled left. He felt, more than saw, the message. Move left or be ready to. Up ahead, the road angled around a lonely outcropping of rock, putting his right shoulder into gravel and shallow ditch before the curve eased back into straight. A group of cattle had found the shoulder and decided, with the confidence of animals that do not know schedules, to sniff the line where the dusk's coolness gathered. Two stood in the lane like sentinels, broad backs dusty silver in the headlights. They were not frightened. The world had never done them that unkindness. Rowan had space. He had time. Because he'd been changed lanes by suggestion, he had exactly enough of both. He put the four ways on once, a private courtesy to anyone who might exist behind him. The cattle turned their large heads. One stepped forward, reconsidered, then followed the other's slow, practical migration off the asphalt. The reflectors held their stillness. The wave had done its job, and let the moment return to ordinary. Rowan put his hazards off, took his foot back to where it had been, and exhaled. He tapped the mic. Open range eastbound, mile 209, couple in the right lane just past the basalt face, he said. A voice a county away answered thank you, as if that were all anyone needed to say to anyone in the night. He watched for the wave, expecting nothing and getting it for a while. The road rose, then smoothed. Heat lightning stitched wider. The world held itself, a cat in a window pretending to sleep. Then, softly as a sigh, the reflectors ahead bloomed one after another to the right, struck off the center line, and climbed the posts that marked the shoulder. It made a staircase of light. It wasn't brightness, not really just the gathered catch of his beams tidily arranged as if to say, step here, now here. He moved right a touch. The steps held. He moved right more. The steps widened, a path where there wasn't one, to a flat, gravelly pullout that should have been invisible under night. He let the rig coast in and settled without drama. The wave collapsed into ordinary reflected dots. The world waited. A minute later the sound arrived, the low, sheet-tearing roar of a dust wall a mile out, outflow from a storm that had decided not to rain on the highway but still wanted to run a hand over it. It came with its own horizon. Even in starlight he could see it, a gray-brown curtain hurrying, then hurrying faster. He watched the oncoming lane as if it were an animal he didn't know yet. A set of lights appeared in the distance, too eager, a low car making its way as if nothing here could ever go bad fast. Rowan flicked his brights off and on, a warning that simply meant watch your mouth when you speak to the road. The car did not slow. Two more sets of headlights appeared behind it, both far enough to have time to be reasonable. The dust arrived like a door closing. The air thickened. Sound turned to cotton. The car afloat in that softness wove once and corrected, then vanished entirely. The world looked background only, no foreground permitted. Rowan sat in the dark pocket he had been given by a lane that was not a lane. Guardrails to his left, safety to his right. He listened to his own engine cool down a degree. He did not reach for the mic because you say less when the world is speaking in large movements. Wind thudded the trailer once, then held it like a handshake. He saw nothing. He saw the hint of nothing. He saw the inside of dust. Then it passed, not dramatically, but all at once, as if a person had realized they were in the wrong room and stepped out. The reflectors ahead looked crisp again. He looked in his mirror for taillights and saw an ambulance far back, not rushing, simply existing. The low car, further ahead, had pulled to the shoulder. Angled wrong and unharmed looking. A figure inside moved. A hazard blinked. Everything was messy and fine. Rowan rolled out slow. The cat's eyes took up their work again like good clerks. He drove with less skepticism, more attention. He learned the wave's grammar, the way a person learns to get along in a town without studying it. By listening for the yes here, not there, underneath all talk. If the reflectors ran toward him in a clean straight line down the middle, the road ahead was plain. If they angled left as they neared, some right side thing waited. A wide animal, a spill, a guardrail that enjoyed surprises. When they rose up the delineator posts, it meant step aside. When they stilled completely and seemed not to reflect as much as they ought to, it meant sudden grade changes or a field of black ice the desert learned from its mountains. He tested it once just enough to prove he wasn't imagining kindness coming toward him. He signaled left to pass a slow farm truck with a load of hay that tallied itself like arithmetic. The reflectors ahead flickered left half a beat before he moved, as if finishing his sentence. He passed politely, hands loose, and returned to his lane without taking advantage of the feeling that someone was doing part of the work for him. It was important to be insured by your own choices, not by Marvel's. Near midnight, he reached a rest area that understood quiet. 2 vending machines glowed with the kind of grace only machines get. Bright. Predictable. In love. With their own buttons. A family minivan slept with its windows just cracked. He backed into a spot facing the entrance, so he could ease out without anyone needing to adjust to him. As he set the brake, he noticed the first marker in the entrance lane shimmered once, and then behaved. A goodbye wave. He answered with 2 taps of his 4 ways. A small thanks to objects that didn't know from gratitude. Inside, the bathroom was clean in the way it is when someone has pride in a job. A map on the wall showed an old alignment of the highway that cut closer to a dry lake bed, marked in faint gray. A pinned photo beside it of a ribbon cutting 2 decades old showed a row of people, one of them a woman in a safety vest holding bolt cutters like a queen holds flowers. The caption said, "New delineators. Phase I." On his way out, a state pickup rolled in, its orange light bar asleep, its bed full of posts and reflectors new enough to look like science. The driver stepped out and stretched. He was weathered in the pleasant way of someone who works outside because inside doesn't make as much sense. "You part of the crew?" Rowan asked, not to pry, simply to say neighbor. "On nights when the wind is bored," the man said, nodding. "Replace posts that get kissed by parts of vehicles they didn't ask to dance with." He eyed the flat. "You see the rabbit?" Rowan allowed himself a smile, small enough not to scare it. "Thought I did," he said. "Thought I shouldn't say it like that. That's what my dad called it," the man said. "He worked out here when they tried the sequencer's solar strobes that ran ahead of traffic. Research money. Never quite got it right. They took them down. Sometimes, when the air's in a mood and there's lightning playing with the top of the atmosphere, the light runs anyway. Not the strobes, they're gone. Just the way your beams catch the cats. That little wave. Folks call in. They always call before the dust blows, not after. I like it when the road gets impatient and decides to help without paperwork." Rowan nodded. He didn't want to take the mystery from it by asking how or why. The man sipped coffee and then added, as if offering a tip a person would remember later. "If it climbs the sticks, get off. If it runs straight and then quits reflecting at all of a sudden, it's black ice. And if it starts in your mirror and comes forward, something behind you needs space." That last thing occurred 20 minutes after he pulled back out. A dull glow formed in the reflectors behind his trailer and ran toward the cab. He glanced back and saw a set of lights crest a shallow hill, closing the distance too quickly. He clicked his hazards twice. The wave ran again and angled to the right. Rowan eased into a turnout barely, deeper than his shadow. The pickup that had been coming blew past, pulling a flatbed with a tractor strapped down on it. The kind of haul that deserves an escort on anything but a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere. The pickup's driver drifted half onto the shoulder and then corrected. No harm. No drama. Rowan moved back out and let his heartbeat accept its own deceleration. All at once he had company. A voice broke through on 19 that sounded like gravel with a license. Eastbound? You seeing that light trick on the cats? The voice asked. No fear in it. Only appetite for confirmation. I am, Rowan said. Follow it like it knows things. Been running this stretch longer than I've been telling the truth about my age, the voice said, warmed. The flats get frisky when the sky wears its static. The rabbit's good. Don't chase it when it runs you off the actual road. It won't. But pride will. Rowan could almost see the man chuckling. The night made friends on its good days. He eased into companionship, the way you join a line by not breaking it. The reflectors ran twice more that night with purpose that could have been coincidence if you like to keep your world small. Once they nudged him left around a fresh shard of muffler pipe that lay sharp as a blade in the dark. Later they suggested a slow down, a half-mile before a cattle guard whose wooden slats had been lost to time. The concrete crosspieces hit hard and would have tested a strap if he'd taken them hot. Just before the state line, the wave rose up the posts again, a steeper ladder than before, and held. He slid to the shoulder. He didn't see the reason until his eyes adjusted to the new angle, and he looked not at the road, but at the ditch. Moonlight that decided to be helpful for once laid a silver sheet on the low place there. A glint answered it. Phone, glass, face down, but catching enough to be noticed by something that wasn't planning to. Beside it, metal pebble-littered grass, the corner of a small sedan rested in the V-bottom of the ditch, polite as a lawn ornament. The car hadn't rolled or smashed. It had left the roadway without flair and stopped there as if embarrassed to be anywhere at all. The hazard lights ticked with the weak, determined rhythm of a battery that still believed in itself. Rowan put his own hazards on and called in the mile marker. He didn't climb down. It wasn't his place to hop fences and bend down to windows in the dark. When everything was calm and soft, he waited until he saw a county sheriff's bar lights roll low over the sage and the road, kissing the reflectors until every cat's eye seemed to purr. He gave the deputy the best, bare facts. Someone's night would be long and fine and all about paperwork. The wave in the reflectors settled back to flatness. Job done. The deputy lifted a hand. Rowan lifted his back and went on. At dawn, after coffee and the small shock of fluorescent light in a dispatch office that believed in early, he signed for delivery with a pen that had been chewed by someone's nerves and walked out into light that made the night feel like a rumor. The cat's eyes looked like unremarkable lenses set into the macadam, and the delineator posts were just posts, pale, practical. He was aware that people who have to make the world run need it to be plain when schedules are in their hands. And yet, back in his cab, he slid the visor down to shade his eyes and found a small square tucked into the band above it. A faded sticker. The kind safety meetings hand out. It showed a cartoon rabbit running along a row of little squares, and the words, in cheerful block letters, "Watch the line." It looked old. He laughed once, softly, and left it there. He didn't need a talisman. He liked the joke. In a small cafe a week later where the coffee was enthusiastic and the biscuits were suspiciously perfect, a woman in a maintenance green shirt sat 2 stools down and spoke without being asked. "I used to pilot for a plow out there," she said, meaning the flats as simply as if pointing at a chair. "When the air hums and the belly of a storm can't decide, the cats talk. We call it runway, because that's what farmers learn to call things that blink in order. You can follow it. You can ignore it. But it points for those who are already looking for a point. That's the deal the road makes. It offers. It doesn't insist." Rowan nodded into his cup. He tried to think of an argument worth making, and didn't find one that would earn the effort. Sometimes, months later, with winter laying a thin, honest cold down on the blacktop, he'd pass the same stretch and nothing would happen. The cat's eyes kept their manners. The reflectors reflected in the dumb, perfect way of devices. Those nights were good. They made the nights when something bent and gave a gift feel more like a choice than a rule. Once, in ground fog where the world became a glass of milk, the wave ran straight toward him and then quit entirely. A black band of no reflection where ice had laid an invisible skin over the road. He let the rig slow, without confession. The trailer behaved. The tires liked him. He liked them back. The rabbit never asked for thanks. It never even admitted it existed. He kept his eyes on the sensible places and treated the small, moving brightnesses as footnotes from a careful editor. He would tell the story in certain diners and never in others. If a new hand asked him a question he could answer with tools, he would answer with torque specs and tie-down angles. If they asked him about the way the road sometimes arranges itself for people who mean well, he would shake his head and say, "Watch the line," because that's both magic and manual. He drove year after year, and the flats stayed flats, indifferent as the ocean, and just as hospitable to people who don't ask more than it can give. Some nights, he got nothing but stars. Other nights the runway woke, a quiet sequence that made the neck hairs of your skepticism lay down and go to sleep. He took both kinds as good fortune. If a road likes you enough to show you what it knows, it's polite to act like you know how to listen. Story number 7. The salt flats at night looked like a black ocean that had made peace with being still. Cass drove straight through their quiet middle. Cab lights turned low, the hum of the engine like a soft thread pulled through fabric. The trailer was easy pallets of folding chairs bound to a town fairgrounds on the other side of the basin. The very idea of people sitting together seemed like a daylight story. Out here, the world was about lanes and horizon, and a sky so full of stars, it looked as if the dark had been peppered with sugar. The highway crossed the flats like a ruler laid down carefully. No trees, no houses, no hills trying to be remembered. The road noise changed in the way it does on concrete poured in long, intelligent slabs. Thump, thump, thump. The seams keeping time in a rhythm that asked nothing more of the mind than to notice and nod. On the sides, low posts with reflectors stood at regular intervals like a row of sleepy sentries. Far out to the south, a train would sometimes snake by, a string of sodium yellow points pretending to be patient. She kept the CB low. It was company without demand. Static. A weather robot promising calm air, a long-haul voice several counties away, trading bull about a diner that had served a hero-sized sandwich to a person who did not deserve it. The dashboard glowed softly. The cruise sat steady. Her hands were alert without being tense, a condition long practice brings when the road is the most honest thing in the day. She saw the sky road the way people see new constellations. First as a doubt, then as a sudden, unavoidable shape. At the edge of the windshield, above the real road, a line of lights hung in the air. Not bright like aircraft, not scattered like campfires on a hill, 2 parallel rows, dull red dots in pale white pairs, arranged exactly as taillights and headlights arrange themselves on a highway. Cass blinked, because blinking is what humans do when the world offers a choice between trick and fact. The line wavered. Not like heat rising off a grill, not like a static smear. It shimmered like something reflected, like distant city glass turned horizontally and held up to the night. The air had a cool bite. The heat mirage explanation died of lack of heat. The lights above drifted slightly to the left where the real road bent left, and then steadied, the overhead lane following precisely the same bend a mile up, in the dark. Once, out here, she had seen a ship float in the sky over the salt pan, a distant lake turning a boat into an airship. The word for it had been in the corner of her memory since grade school. Something about a queen and a magician. Fata Morgana. Yes, superior mirage, when warmer air traps light and makes it bend like a lens. It lived over deserts and water and stories. She listened to her heart tap once, then returned to its long work. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She watched. The sky road held its place, a ribbon of pale movement laid over stars. She looked down at the real lane where her tires belonged. The reflectors on the posts looked back cheerfully. The surface of the flats lay to either side like black silk. The first proof that it wasn't only spectacle came quickly. Far ahead on the sky road, the white pair of lights, at the very right of the Phantom, Lane darted left as if to pass. The red set in front of it grew briefly brighter, dimmed, then brightened again. Brake lights, politely testing and releasing. Cass's hands loosened on the wheel, because she knew what habit does in a driver who thinks he's alone. A pass before the slight bend, a miscounting of wind. She checked the real mirror. In the distance, ground level, a pair of real headlights appeared, low and small, too far to be affected by her thoughts. She had time. On the sky road, the white pair wavered in that subtle way of someone correcting for a shy gust. Cass moved left a foot within her lane, not because she needed it, but because courtesy sometimes answers to a different clock than rules. The distant real headlights did exactly what the sky ones had. They passed, took the center, then returned. The timing was off by a minute, more or less, but the choreography matched like a good cover of a song. She said, in the tone a person uses when testing their voice in a large, empty room. Sure. It was not consent. It was acknowledgement. The highway drew her onward. The sky road above stuck with her, respecting her speed as if it had been plotted with the same graph. To the right, the salt flats caught stray starlight and held it. At the horizon line, very distant flashes stitched without thunder, the sort of lightning that spends itself on curiosity instead of hitting the ground. Maybe the air was laminated in layers tonight, crisp and lucky, and the flats were acting like a mirror that had forgotten its place. The sky road's red dots ahead, the taillights began blinking, not hazard quick, but steady, like a metronome's one hard tick. The cluster of them all blinked together twice, and then the pattern broke apart. A construction zone, her driver's brain offered. The way the mind grabs for the nearest drawer with the word relevant on it. She looked at the real horizon. It was flat and plain and empty of orange signage. She coasted a few notches down anyway, and a minute later the first barrel appeared, then more, ghostly pale in her high beams, standing at even intervals like an odd parade of little drummers. A maintenance crew had left a lane ghosted off for work to resume later. The phantom lights had flashed before barrels were in her world. She followed the barrels through their brief curving corridor and tried not to be too grateful, because gratitude tempts superstition, and superstition is a messy passenger. The CB clicked. Anybody else seeing a second road up there? A voice asked, amused, not frightened. It sounded like a person with a thermos that never runs out and hands that have learned to open without clenching. Seeing, Cass said, because sometimes that's all the confirmation a stranger needs to keep from talking themselves into trouble. The channel was quiet otherwise. The weather robot whispered wind predictions like a bedtime story. She settled into the companionship. The sky road spilled out its quiet forecasts in shapes instead of words. Once, the overhead ribbon showed a cluster of very slow red dots in her lane. A truck idling, a car behind it, another behind. Ground level, a mile later, a driver changed a tire on the shoulder, and a good Samaritan had parked a little too far into the lane with hazards ticking like a patient clock. Cass dimmed, swung wide without show, and let the night keep its quiet. The phantom display lent her a minute of bracing she might not have given herself in a world without such gifts. The flats stretched. She counted no towns. The station she'd meant to sip coffee from closed hours ago. Its neon made a tidy halo on the empty. The sky above was so clean she could spot the curve of the planet by the way the stars gathered, and then leaned away from the invisible line. The sky road mirrored the highway's gentle deviations faithfully. It had even adopted the lowest bulge of a culvert, where the ground rose by inches, the phantom line bending up for no reason anyone would notice in daytime. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes a bright pair overhead would waver and then vanish, as if the lens had snapped loose on that patch of air. At those moments, the real road ahead showed nothing special, only conformity, only expectation. Then the mirage returned, as if someone had set a projector back on its stand. The weirdest part came when the phantom lane above showed something that shouldn't have existed at all. An exit sign hanging in black space, its green face smeared and readable as a palm in a rainstorm. The letters swam, but they were letters. She strained not to squint. There shouldn't be an exit not for miles. 207. Maybe something that started with 2. Then a word with a J. Maybe junction. She cut herself off. Squinting at mirages while driving is a club no one should be a member of. She smiled despite herself when, a few minutes later, a new interchange rose out of the flats, a simple thing. The kind concrete builds when it's answering a question quickly, and the exit sign turned its clean green face toward her. Mile. 207. Juniper Wash Road. The angle of the overhead replica, had lied about color and clarity, but the content had been faithful. The air had decided to show her what the maps had drawn long ago. At Juniper Wash, a food truck with a handmade open sign in its window glowed like a friend at the edge of a party. 4 semis had gathered in the shadow of a single floodlight. The smell of onions and butter jumped the distance like an animal. She didn't. The sky road felt fragile, like song you can hum even after it ends, but that you know you'll lose if you interrupt yourself too much. Past the junction, the flats settled into deeper quiet. She kept the overhead show to the corner of her eye as if it were a shy guest. Darkness deepened and gained texture, the way night does when the eyes adjust to what's never going to be full day anyway. The phantom lights arranged themselves in a line that looked wrong in a way her hands felt before her mind wrote the memo. The red dots hung not in 2 lines but staggered, as if the cars had drifted wide to straddle both lanes. Something was in the road overhead, forcing them to make their own geometry. She peeled back her speed. In the real lane, far, then nearer, a pale obstacle appeared. A roll of something that might have been fencing. It was not threatening, not dramatic, just there. A truck far ahead had hit it and pulled it into a low scrawl across the line. The scattered cars had done exactly what the sky had shown. Cass had time to be the version of a driver she liked. Early, calm, in a sensible place on the asphalt. She started thinking of someone who might have first noticed the thing and given it a name, because people give things names when they like them or when they fear them. Skyway. Float lane. Air road. She amused herself with options for a mile, then lost the thread, the way people lose good thoughts when the reality in front of them presents another flavor of attention. A dark strip far ahead on the sky road filled with white glare, as if a curtain had been pulled, and then settled back. A wrong-way driver would have made that shape headlights at you, in a place where they should not be. The overhead ribbon smoothed again, but the impression had landed. She made the small private choice people make in a place like this. She nudged the wheel enough to live consistently outside the center, the way you do when an accident behind a bend is plausible and not dramatic. Ground level, a minute later, an old sedan drifted over the double yellow in a slow, thoughtless curve, corrected lazily, and continued. Maybe the driver was yawning, maybe they was frightened of the quiet and looking at their own hands. It didn't matter. The move would have startled her more if the sky hadn't handed her a photograph first. At the next mile marker, she clicked her 4 ways twice and let them go, a tiny gesture toward the air. In response, or just in coincidence, the sky road narrowed slightly, as if the Mirage's lens had been stopped down. She had the ridiculous sensation of being answered. She let it go. The flats ask kindness of the folks who cross them. This could be her version. The real lanes held steady. The truck performed exactly what it was designed for. She thought of her father, who had said, when she wanted to learn, that the best drivers are the ones a passenger forgets to watch. Nobody rode with her except the impression she carried of being watched over by something that didn't ask for thanks. In the most empty middle of the night, with the seam thump of the concrete the only heartbeat she needed, the radio drifted across odd frequencies. The AM dial, that old river, briefly caught a station that read school closings in a voice tape decades ago. It went as quickly as it came. Her CB whispered and then quieted, like someone deciding against a joke. The sky road kept its counsel, rising and falling in neat mimicry of the barely rolling ground. She wondered how far the air could borrow the road. 10 miles? 20? A reflection overhead of a future ahead. The light jumping first to one place and then to where she could use it, like heat rolling up an iron and then into the room you are standing in. Just as the sky began to gray at that edge where night gets nervous, the phantom ribbon did something showy, as if it had saved one surprise for last. On the curve of the Mirage, overhead, a set of red dots all bloomed bright at once and froze. Hazard blinkers, many of them, not blinking. They glowed steady, like a string of lanterns hung in a row, and refused electricity's orders. She felt the small hair along her arms lift, as if remembering cold, windless air. She cut speed. She put her foot above the brake. Not on it. In the real distance, a shape took a long time to resolve. A herd of wild horses had found the highway. They were just standing, waiting. 6 or 8 shapes, more brush-colored than night-colored, manes bleached a bit by salt and sun, bodies gathering heat from the asphalt like big cats on stone. They did not panic. They did not hurry. Cass stopped as confidently as she knew how to. Hazard lights on, rig square, 100 feet out. Her trailer sighed to stillness. The first of the horses looked up, made a small decision in its head about her intentions, then took 2 steps and made a new decision. The group flowed right in that unhurried, unarguable way animals do when they know they are the oldest thing on a landscape. In her mirror, far off, another set of headlights slowed in time, a good driver doing good driving, which felt, for a moment, like a perfect verse of a poem no one will ever write down. The horses vanished into the dark as if they had just been phantoms, unbothered by eternity, interested only in their next piece of quiet. Cass eased out again and clicked her hazard off. Overhead, the mirage's fixed red beads softened and returned to their slow flicker, like breath restored after a held note. By the time the first honest smears of daylight touched the salt with a chalk line, the sky road had faded, as if it had been erased by a teacher who didn't want the next class to cheat. The horizon remained, which was the important thing. The long seam thumps passed under the tires at the same rate whether or not the world offered commentary. She let the cruise settle back where it liked. The coffee in the thermos was less a drink now, and more an idea. At the first rest area, a concrete apron with long-angle spaces, a low building with generous bathrooms, water fountains that never quite stopped tasting of minerals, she parked nose out and stepped down. The air carried a bite and a tang. Salt settled in her nose and on her lips. Ridiculous until you remembered where you were. The flats stretched away like a promise and a dare. The sky was still. She walked to the low wall by the overlook and leaned a hip. A laminated sign bolted to the concrete tried to explain the basin to passing eyes. Its pictures faded a little. It had a paragraph on superior mirages, with a line drawing of a ship floating above its own ghost. Another sign, smaller, added later, told a story about an overpass that had never been built. Plans drawn, funds reallocated, it said kindly. The road changed its mind. A faded sticker was stuck to the corner of the sign, probably slapped there by someone with too much energy and not enough supervision. It was a schematized highway with a ribbon up above the kind a child would draw if asked to draw a road in the sky. Someone had written in neat, tiny ballpoint letters along the sticker's top edge, "Watch the sky when the ground is generous." She laughed softly, because the advice was absurd and exactly right. Back in the cab, she set her coffee down and glanced at the windshield, because that's what people do when they've seen things. They expect proof to offer itself. A thin stain of salt dust had dried along the edge of the glass where the wipers didn't wipe. In it, there was a straight line, a faint twin parallel a few inches above, and a tiny smudge between them like 2 dots. The shape looked like a child's depiction of lanes, splayed just enough to suggest perspective. Maybe her rig had parked in a spot someone else had left dusty. Maybe the morning wind had traced it. Maybe the world sometimes drew pictures on things to remind them of what they had seen. The radio, set absently to AM after the overnight browsing, picked up a local morning program with a man who enjoyed his own jokes more than he should. "If you're on the flats," he said, "we're told the air is crisp and cool, and there's even talk of a mirage or two if you squint. Keep it between the mayonnaise and the mustard, friends." He laughed at himself. The phrase meant lane lines in some slices of the country. It sounded comforting here, ridiculous and fine. On the far side of the rest area, another driver stood by his truck, hands on hips looking out. He caught Cass's glance and tipped his chin toward the east. "You see the thing?" he asked, without preliminaries. "The Sky Road?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, and grinned, without showing too much of anything. "Some nights the flats remind us they used to be water. Guess they miss hosting boats. Guess they borrowed us for a bit. It's handy when it's handy. Don't chase it when it gets playful." "I won't," she said. She meant it. She rolled out unhurried. The flats passed themselves under her again, now chalk pale, now bright. The overhead sky offered only itself. When she reached the far side, where the ground remembered how to rise and the highway followed it, a billboard on 2 tall posts showed a laughing family at a county fair, sitting on chairs like the ones rattling just barely in her trailer. The caption said, "Sit for a while. Stay for a while." She liked the way a phrase could sound like a friend. Weeks later, on a different night when the thunder had moved on to bother someone else, and the air was so clear the stars seemed closer than the next exit, the Sky Road returned. She did not ask it to. It simply unfolded, pale and precise, running a heartbeat ahead of the earthbound truth. She nodded to it like you nod to someone who has done you a favor. You didn't have the words to request. The night nodded back in the way nights do. It kept smooth what could have been rough, and when it found a reason to show her the problem before the problem, it did, without making a speech about it. She never told it as a ghost story. It wasn't one. It was a road story. The most the world had done was bend light and give her a piece of something early. She was content with that. Not all hauntings are about what is left. Some are about what arrives a moment before you do, and then, kindly, waits. Story number 8. On the high plateau where the road forgot how to curve, the wind had a voice like a long exhale. Sloane drove northwest with a load of dry goods boxed into tidy stacks, the trailer steady behind him like a polite shadow. The sky was winter clear, the stars crisp enough to count, and the kind of cold that makes the cab's heater feel like a little cabin up in the mountains. The dash glowed a calm constellation of its own. His coffee had cooled to that agreeable middle where it no longer pretended to be anything but a chore, and still it tasted good. The land here rose and fell in long, slow sighs. Few trees, fewer towns. The highway ran like a seam between fields that had slept since harvest, just a thread holding the world together. There were places where the old highway slanted off and back, small stubs of that former self left behind like old bones in grass. He liked the way the night made those ghosts polite. He liked the way the high beams threw out a carpet of white and then rolled it up again. The first sweep of light came from the left, clean and slow, as if someone had lifted a flashlight and ran it across the far horizon. It wasn't a vehicle. It wasn't lightning. It was a blade of white that moved with intention, skimming the ridge, crossing the highway a mile ahead, then gliding out into dark. It returned after a few breaths. Same pace, same bright, and went on, like a lighthouse with no water to guard. Sloane glanced at the clock, then at the radio like it should have an answer. The CB muttered softly to itself, somebody far off telling a joke to a man who had already heard it. The weather robot, on a different frequency, promised clear, cold, and light winds. No advisory. The road itself was dry, honest, and keen. He knew a little about these high places, enough for the word to bubble up from some old article or museum plaque, airway beacons. Before radar, before GPS, in the years when mail flew low and pilots needed handrails in the sky, towers had dotted the plains and plateaus. Big arrows on the ground, big lamps above, each one sweeping to catch a pilot's hungry eye. He had seen one in daylight once, rusted and stubborn against retirement. A museum piece on a hill with a plaque that thanked a man for winding it each night like a clock. He hadn't known any were still lit. The beam slid across the horizon again, not frenzied, not lazy. Sloane didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He watched, and let his hands keep doing what they already knew. In the mirror, the trailer's outline held its dignity. The tires sang one note like a patient reed instrument. "Anybody else see the lighthouse?" the radio asked, and he felt a flicker of relief that he wasn't the only one with a vocabulary problem. The voice was low, amused the way people are amused when the world insists on being larger than their categories. "I see it," Sloane said, thumb on the talk button, warm from the habit. "Old airmail beacon up near Cinder Hill," the other driver said. "Been dead longer than my favorite boots. Some nights it forgets." A little smile in. The words, "When it stalls, I trust it. That's when it's pointing on purpose." Sloane nodded to nobody. The beam swept again, then half a mile before the summit sign stalled. It froze on a narrow cut where the highway squeezed between two low, dark knuckles of hill. The light held there, not blinding, only persistent, as if saying, "Here." He eased off a few miles per hour. No one was behind him, within reason to disagree. He settled the truck, as if preparing to be asked a careful question. The cut appeared. Frost had thrown glitter on the ragged grass at the shoulder. In the shadows, the road's black felt wetter than it had any right to be on a night this dry. A low band of hoar had painted the asphalt into glass where the sun, earlier, hadn't bothered. He could feel the change through his hands before his eyes could name it, the particular shiver in the wheel that says friction is taking a cigarette break. He kept his inputs quiet. The rig floated, and then caught again, grateful for his manners. The beam released its hold and swung on, businesslike. Sloane exhaled and gave 2 quick taps of his four-ways habit. Courtesy. A small signal to the empty. The radio licked static, and then gave him someone else's laugh from miles away. He smiled despite himself. For a few minutes, the beam was just a sweep. Then it lingered again, this time to the right of the highway, where a long turnout opened near a brake check sign. He didn't need a brake check. The grade wasn't serious here. Still, he slid in gently, let the tires crunch frost, and rolled to a stop. He listened. The night had that big quiet that isn't empty, the kind that holds 1,000 tiny sounds. A mouse negotiating a stem, the tick of cooling metal, the far-off cough of an engine that changed its mind. Headlights rose over the ridge after a minute, small and then bigger. A box truck easing down faster than wisdom. A dog barked from the passenger seat, its voice like a toy too earnest to be annoying. At the bottom of the grade, where the black went to slick again, the driver feathered the brakes wrong and got the little hop that feels like the road is a rug someone just snapped. He corrected, then overcorrected, then found his straight line again by luck and the cooperation of physics. If Sloan had been there in the lane, steady as he had been intending, that small dance would have overlapped his own plan in a way that would have been polite at best, unkind at worst. The truck went on. The beam swung, easy, uncommitted, as if it had never stalled at all. He eased out again and let the night carry him. Past the summit, the land opened into one of those wide places where the highway looks like a line drawn by a child with a ruler. The beacon's tower, yes there, he saw it now, stood off to the south, a black tooth with a pale block at the top. It swept a perfect circle, then another, never hurrying. When the lamp crossed his cab, the light slid through his windshield like cold water. It did not hurt. It did not demand. It was just a hand on the shoulder to let him know where he was in the world. At the long S-curve near mile 84, the beam slowed, not stalled, but slowed. And Sloan felt it as a suggestion for patience. The crosswind picked up, shouldering the trailer a little. He laid the rig into the wind the way a person leans into someone when the sidewalk is slick. A low rumble sounded to the right, the old bridge over the creek with the metal grate. In summer, it thrummed. Tonight it sang a single, long, low note. The light slid away again, its work done. At the next break in the radio's politeness, a new voice came on, younger, too awake. Northwest bound. Anybody caught that snow fence at 92? It asked. Looks like it got itself clever. Say again, Sloan said. Fence panel let go, the voice said. It's in the ditch. Might blow out if the wind thinks it's a kite. Copy. Sloan looked to the right where posts marched away into the field with their slanted boards. At 92, one panel had indeed laid down, polite in its failure, a rectangle of wood angled into brown grass. He kept speed. If it wanted the road, it could not have it tonight. The wind had decided on a different direction. The beam swept and did not comment. He passed an old alignment pulled into a crescent near the foot of a hill, just a stubbled ribbon now with a rusty guardrail guarding nothing but memory. Beyond it, tucked in a shallow hollow, a square building hunkered, low and practical, a maintenance shed with a yard of gravel and a chain-link fence, holding various piles of things people only understand when they're needed. As the lamp swept, the shed's window flashed pale, a quick blink, and Sloan had the strong, particular feeling of eye contact. He raised 2 fingers off the wheel and put them back again. The beam's next stall was dramatic only if you were paying attention. It held on the far side of a shallow rise where the highway sank into a basin. Sloan had no reason to slow for terrain alone. He slowed anyway because trust sometimes looks like deciding not to show off. As he crested, an elk in that exact brown that keeps secrets stood in the shallow of the right lane, waiting for reasons only elk comprehend. It didn't startle. It didn't argue. It looked at the truck as if assessing a new cloud. He had all the time in the world to bleed off speed, to edge left, to give space like a gift. The elk stepped once, twice, and was gone into grass. The lamp eased away, uninterested in applause. The highway fell toward a small town that had chosen to sleep next to it, as if the white noise would keep it from dreaming too hard. The exit ramp offered a gas station with 2 pumps lit like they were performing for an audience of 3. A low diner, with a sign that still promised pot roast as if it were a holiday, sat square to the road. The beam swept over the town, caressed the edges of these small fittings, and then kept its slow circle. He kept on, not needing fuel, not needing a seat at a laminated counter, The next plateau lifted him again into cold and stars. The radio clicked. "Northwest, you got a tour bus behind you 2 miles back," the gravel voice from earlier said. "She's making time. Might not love what happens at the cut." Sloan checked his mirror. Small lights far back, high and even, yes, a coach. He clicked his hazards twice, then took them off again. He wanted the driver awake to his lights without insult. The beam swung and then froze again ahead, the same slice of cut where the frost had made itself king an hour before. He eased. The coach did too, naturally, in sympathy or because that's what you do when you see brake lights where none were expected. They reached the cut together, spaced politely. The rig floated and caught. The coach's driver did exactly what Sloan's hands had done. Less. The bus held steady and went on. He felt the wash of relief swoop through him, without show. The beacon sweep felt like a nod. Past the cut, the road ran straight toward the tower. As the beam crossed his hood, the light came in a different color. Softer. Older. Like the warmth of a bulb that wasn't all white. He thought of filaments. He thought of someone in a coat, wearily checking a tank, winding a mechanism. He thought of grease that holds the smell of hands. The illusion lasted a heartbeat, and then the light was simply lamp again, clean and modern in its feel. At mile 103, a runaway truck ramp opened, its bed of gravel lighter than road, and aiming upslope like a hand saying, "Wait." He glanced at it because everybody glances, even those who will never need it, for the reassurance that something large and merciful stands nearby. The beam paused here too for a fraction, not to command, just to annotate. He had a memory of a story told by someone older in a motel breakfast room about a driver who had treated ramps as a personal failure and then, one night, had let himself take one and had been met at the top by a state cop who said, "You did fine," like a priest. He drove on, the beam now a metronome. When it stalled, he played along. When it swung, he made no future out of it. The land began to fold itself into a range of low hills, their silhouettes blunt and regular like knuckles on a working hand. The beacon's tower crowned a shallow ridge to his left now, nearer than before. He could see the cross braces in black against the sky. He could see that the top was not a glass box as he had imagined, but a cowl, a hood, something built to withstand weather and indifference. He might have pulled off the highway and found a county road that wound under it. But he did not chase things at night that did not want to be chased. He kept the long habit. At a little locational sign, Cinder Hill County, white letters on green, the beam swept once, twice, then stopped. It held not on road but on a dark block a quarter-mile off the shoulder, a rectangle 1-story high with a porch. A small building with clapboard sides and a door that imagined visitors. It stood at the end of a short track and had no business being lit. It wasn't lit. The beam lit it. The door had a window. In that window was a square of cardboard, white and handwritten. "Open," it said. Under it, smaller, "Coffee." He laughed at his own brain. The sign was a day thing. The beam only reminded it existed. He did not exit. He let the knowledge of that building sit in him like a tool he might use later when night changed shape. The beam spun and carried on. Near the county line, the road pinched to 2 lanes again where construction had made promises, and then moved a cone and left. The beam held long and low across a stretch of pavement that had gone glassy. Overnight freezing fog turned to black film. Sloan felt the wheel go light and kept his hand still. The trailer's weight thought about philosophy and decided to remain practical. Across the way, in the oncoming lane, a rental box truck did not get the memo. It twitched once, then more, then chose the shoulder by accident, and stopped there like it had been born to stop in that exact place. Sloan's radio picked up the driver's strained, Okay, in a voice talking to itself. He fought the urge to say, "You are okay." He let quiet do its work. The beam did not spare him from everything. It did not promise. At mile 119, a coyote flashed from the median before the light could have told him anything useful. He lifted, watched the animal make the decision that saved them both, and let the heart bump pass through him like a wave through a pier. The lamp did not pause or pity. It simply went on. He rolled through the kind of dawn that happens on these heights. the east whitening gently until the night cracked along the edges like a window filmed with frost. The beacon's light thinned in that strange way. Lights thin when day has an opinion. It swept once more across the highway, touching it with a grayness a degree lighter than the world around, and then it went out. Not a drama. Not a fail. Simply done. He drove the last miles as if the light had never existed, and still he checked the places where it had stalled with his eyes, because trust is habit, not occasional spectacle. At a town where the main street ran invitedly close to the highway, he stopped for fuel because that's what you do when the gauge says it's time. The steam from the pump made a low cloud that caught the new light and turned itself into gold. The clerk was younger than the old beacons, older than the phone they used to take payment. The man had a jacket with the county name over one pocket and an embroidered tower over the other. "Beacon running last night," Sloan said, as if reporting a deer. The clerk grinned. "Some nights," he said. "They left the guts in there when they made it fancy for a museum day 20 years back. When the air's dry and the stars act polite, the windmill next to it cranks just enough juice to wake the old girl. Nobody pays for it. Nobody authorizes it. It just does what it did. Watchers up on the ridge like to pretend it's their granddad getting a last look. I think it's just a machine that doesn't know it's retired." Sloan nodded like he agreed, and like he didn't, and like agreement wasn't the point. On the counter near the register sat a faded photograph under cracked glass. In it, a man in a coat too thin for the weather stood at the base of the beacon tower, one hand on a lever, the other shading his eyes from light he had decided was his responsibility. The caption read, "Henry Coe, Keeper, 1930, 1944. Someone had put a small sticker on the glass nearby. Not thoughtfully, just at an angle. "Keep to the light," it said in letters that might have been from a children's book. He didn't comment on the sticker. It wasn't original, but it felt like a footnote the county had added to history for itself. "How do you read it?" the clerk asked, as if they were comparing notes on a road sign in a foreign alphabet. "When it holds, I give it the benefit of the doubt," Sloan said. "When it doesn't, I stick to the plan." "Plan's good," the clerk said. He slid the receipt across like a card in a quiet game. Knight likes people with plans. On his way out, Sloan took a moment to look east. The beam tower was dark, a silhouette now like any telephone pole grown interesting. A red cap on its top hinted at a modern aircraft warning light that was as asleep as a cat under a stove. The windmill near it clicked once, lazily, as if turning in a dream. By afternoon he'd be in a warehouse where the air tasted like cardboard, and the lights were a soft lie all day long. He'd be a signature and a bill of lading and a nod. He would not mention the beacon to the clipboard man because the conversation would end politely and without understanding. He didn't want it to end at all. A week later, the weather turned, and he took the long way south, avoiding the plateau because the sky had decided to fall in pieces along its edge. On a later route, months on, he came through again, and the lamp did not sweep because the air did not ask it to. The tower kept its shape against cloud, and he watched it the way a person watches a friend across a room, sympathetic to the other's need to be quiet. New drivers asked him about wind and tires and grades, and he said true things. He did not say that sometimes a light will adopt you for a night and read the road ahead without making a sermon of it. He didn't have to. If it wanted them, it would find them. In certain diners, when the hour was gentle and the pie was better than it had to be, a driver with a tired cap might raise his coffee and say without preface, "If the old beacon up at Cinder's turning, you treat that light like a kind neighbor. If it's looking hard at a place, you go soft." Heads would nod. No one would argue. A lady who ran a snowplow once would say, "I always wave at it," and no one would make fun of her because they all did too. Sloan kept a habit after that winter. When a highway gave him a thing before he asked, he thanked it with those 2 quick hazard taps and no more. He never caught the lamp in a stall again that winter because luck does not try to impress for sport. He drove a lot of ordinary nights where the road was simply road, and his eyes were enough. He liked those nights. He liked all of it. The world is big and most of it is practical goodness if you don't force it to be a picture. He kept one small new thing in his rig, tucked in the visor where receipts and polite fictions live. A postcard he bought in the clerk's store on the plateau. It showed the beacon in 1933, a night shot that had somehow caught the movement of the sweep in a still white painted into the air like handwriting. Across the bottom, In archival type, it read, Night Route. Somebody, years later, had written in pen, too dark to have been legal, above the caption, Keep to the light, and the light keeps to you. He didn't show the card to anyone. He didn't need to. When he reached those high straight places again, in cold or heat, he would still watch the roadside weeds bow, still listen for the tire song, still take counsel from the way frost forms in hollows. If the lamp turned, he'd live with it for the minutes it offered. If it stayed dark, he'd be fine. His hands knew their work. His eyes were good, and the road, most nights, was in the mood to help. And that brings tonight's ride to a close. 8 true trucker horror stories from the highways that never rest. Out there, somewhere in the dark, another driver watches the road ahead, hoping the shadows stay behind. If these stories kept you company through the night, give this video a like. It helps us keep rolling through the darkness. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another drive into the strange and the unknown. Until next time, keep your lights bright, your mind calm, and your doors locked. Good night and safe travels wherever the road takes you.